Good evening, all. We're streaming on a Friday night again, obviously, because exams are happening in our house. The good news is my eldest is now 5/8 of the way through her exams, so just another week and a half to go, and they'll all be over. Firstly, I want to say thank you all. The channel reached 900 subscribers last night, which was a nice big milestone. So let's have a nice big push for 1,000, shall we? Yes, 1,000 is where you can do that magical monetizing thing. I was listening to DM James earlier today on his channel, and my channel and his channel are very much neck and neck in terms of subscribers, and he was saying he's not going to monetize. I will. Because if I can make enough to pay for a monthly subscription to Incarnate and things like that, then I can do more stuff. And more stuff is good. Right. Before I get into the topic, what's been happening in games recently? My group on a Saturday night finished Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh last Saturday, and I am proud to announce that they managed to storm the ship at the end and take it without casualties. And it just proved the effectiveness of winning initiative every single round and hitting a spellcaster and spoiling all of his spells. Because if he'd have got his web spell or his sleep spell off at any point, it would have been all over. But no, they succeeded. So well done to them. Or well done to their initiative dice, which kept rolling 5s and 6s. Just going to say hello to a few people who are in chat at the moment. I do have Elfbait connected to the stream, though he's currently muted. Not sure what he's up to.
I'm here. I was just letting you do your intro.
Oh, no worries. Just stop me rambling. I mean, all my intro ever is it's just an old bloke rambling. Looks like we have Mage's Musings here. We have Halakar. Everyone's been chatting before I came along. And Kathy, are you new? Have you been to one of my? I don't recognise you. But welcome. We have 6 people watching. I don't think Friday streams are ever quite as busy as my Wednesday one, but there's competition out there on a Friday night. More established streams, more intelligent people, people with more knowledge. Anyway, hello Praxis, how are you doing? So how are you keeping, Elfbait? Are you all right?
I'm doing all right. Just coming to the end of my work week tomorrow. I'm one of those unfortunate folks who has to work halfway through the weekend, but
I work alternate weekends, so it's this week is my weekend off. Next week I'll have to work Saturday and Sunday. But working in retail, you have to do it.
Oh yeah.
And I think some other people have said they're going to join us as well. And I do have a topic. No doubt it will descend into just talking nonsense for hours. That's what it always does. But I wanted to just see what people have got in their collections that they've spent money on and never used. Because I look at my collection and I think that looks really good. I'd love to play that sometime. And that. And it's all sat there completely unused. Just trying to read what Kathy's saying. I can't. I think either auto correction or fingers have gone wobbly on the second part there, because I can't understand the second sentence. So, what percentage of your collection do you reckon you've used, Elfbait?
My collection's gone through stages. There is my childhood collection, my bachelor collection, the early marriage collection, and the current collection. So uh, I did a horrible thing and sold off a huge chunk of it early in my marriage because I just wasn't using it. Never do that again. Never sell anything. And just my one piece of advice. But I would say percentage wise, right now, I mean, I'm playing 2 games that I own for the last decade, and that's Call of Cthulhu and D&D.
Right.
So I would say good 90+% of it's sitting idle.
Just sat there unused. Yeah.
That's RPGs. I mean, there's also miniatures games which have gone 100% idle for the last decade. So,
I mean, I occasionally play board games with the family, and I think we must have about 50 board games on the shelves downstairs, and 40% of them have never been played. Half of the others have maybe been played once, and the remainder have probably been played 5 or 6 times. There's a few games we play quite a lot, but a lot of it just sits there. It looks pretty.
Yeah, I'm not a collector of board games by any stretch of the imagination. That's other guys in my gaming group that was their big thing. I mean, just insane amounts of board games. But yeah, it was a time when games came out so infrequently, I could say that I had played just about 80% of what had come out. But nowadays, there's a new game every hour, it seems.
Yeah. Most of my purchases in recent years have come at the UK Games Expo. But the last time I went was 2019. Obviously, 2020, 2021 was pandemic affected, and this year there was an expo, but I didn't go because I've got to get a decent car, and I end up spending far too much money on games I'll never play at the expo. So I'm gonna go back again next year, but no doubt add another carload of stuff to my collection that will just sit there looking pretty.
That's one thing I'm looking forward to is conventions. I've moved cross country halfway across the U.S. and I'm now within prime driving distance of about 5 major conventions. Gen Con, Gary Con, all those big U.S. conventions are in range now. So I'll be going to Gen Con this August for the first time.
I've got an ocean to cross to get there, unfortunately.
Yeah, where I get envious is you guys have some amazing miniatures conventions over there.
Yeah, I suppose if you're into that side of the hobby, then yeah. And there's lots of little conventions that go on over here, but you have to seek them out.
Gaming clubs too. That's just something that doesn't exist in very frequently over here. Just game clubs. I mean, you might have guys who get together and play, but like kind of weirder, broader, open spaces for gaming and stuff, not a thing.
One of the problems I tend to have with a lot of the conventions and game clubs is a lot seems to happen on a Sunday, and I work alternate Sundays during the day, and I work every Sunday evening. So it's just. There's a local club where I know a few of the people, but they play on a Sunday night. So it's no use. I run a pub quiz, and I have done for best part of 20 years every single Sunday night. You never know. If my channel makes lots of money, I can give it up. I doubt it. It'll make pennies. But.
Yeah, I made an attempt at one point to do the whole YouTube channel thing. And in like 5 years, managed to get to 80 subscribers, and I'm like, no.
I was never expecting anything more. I was happy when I got to 50. I was like, wow. But now I look at it at 900. I'm like,
let me answer Halakar. He's wondering where I am now.
Oh yeah. So where are you now?
I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. So I'm at the juxtaposition, the convergence of the South and the Midwest, kind of where they kind of hit.
What I know about Missouri is it's in the middle, isn't it? You're just south of the bit around the lakes.
Yeah. So it's a nice city, actually. The gaming community here seems to be really good. Within days of getting here, I connected with the local game store, and they have organized game nights for miniatures and RPGs and tabletop and lots of space, and So just a matter of lining up with my schedule, kind of in your
Yeah.
situation similar to you. Like one of the days that I'm really interested in, I'm like, I have to work that day. That's the BattleTech day is on Saturdays, and I have to work Saturdays. So
Yeah, and I'm holding off various commitments because I want to go back to my judo, which I was doing quite seriously before COVID hit, and I don't want to overcommit myself on nights where judo clubs tend to train, but I haven't really. I had a bit of an issue when I tried going back to do with medication, and I'm planning on going back again this summer to try again, but it's something I need to do. I'm 50 now, and I need to get myself back in shape. I've got myself a shiny black belt. I need to wear it. Need to wear it proudly and be confident in wearing it.
Yeah, I had the scary visit with my doctor just the other day. Like, hey, you're 50. Look at all these bad numbers.
Yes, yeah. I mean, before all COVID hit, I'm trying to work out about 158 pounds in my weight. I had a very, very relaxed resting heart rate. My blood pressure was very, very healthy. And after a year and a half of sat on my backside, I was almost at stroke level. So these things happen.
Oh yeah.
Anyhow, let's talk about some games. This is
not Tinkar's Tavern with Gamer Health, right?
I was the unusual aging RPG nerd with a 30-inch waist.
That's like Bigfoot.
Right. Anyway, let's look at some things that I own that I wish I'd played that I've never played. Let's start with AD&D modules. And the reasons why I haven't reviewed either of these two.
It's because you haven't played them.
Haven't run them. Never played them. Well,
D3 is kind of a joke anyway. So
I would love to run it. I'd love to get my teeth into it because it's such a challenge for a DM, and I just want to make. I would love to see what I could do with the Drow City, having played several years of Call of Cthulhu quite intensively. I think I could make it fairly horrible.
If you were to dial back the Drow and run them like they're depicted early on, and I think actually the existence of Spelljammer kind of makes that spider ship at the end a little bit easier to deal with and accept too if you wanted to keep it.
Spelljammer doesn't exist in my head.
Well, I know, but I'm saying for those folks who who want to go that route, because even when Spelljammer first came out, we always played it as just the Astral Sea, not its own separate thing. So. And I think that's actually how they're reinterpreting it now in 5th edition. But
yeah, I suppose I could run those two if I just handed out a lot of pre-gens to my group. But we got so close in a recent campaign and I want to run them with characters that people will care about.
I think that would be important for the Drow City. You need to care. You need to really feel like your character's in jeopardy, and players aren't going to really think that or feel that if they don't have an attachment. And
sadly, my G3 ended that group, so that's those two. I mean, that cover is just one of the great AD&D module covers as well. Blip Dual Poop in all her silhouetted glory.
Yep, naked lobster goddess right there.
Oh yes. And shall I annoy everyone in chat by showing the next one that I've never run, that I own, and I never will run it. And I think my regulars will know what's coming now when they see a black cover emerging. I'm trying to hide the code, but you can probably see it already.
Expedition to the Barrier Peaks.
There we go.
I personally love that one, but
bloody hate it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't do sci-fi. I don't do well. I do sci-fi if it's something like Paranoia, because it's not sensible.
I play sci-fi. In fact, I mean, honestly, one of those games that's in my collection that I really want to get back into playing and haven't played since high school is Star Frontiers. So
never played it.
I still have my box sets and all that fun stuff. It's got an amazing fan following, like two active fanzines, with each being up to in the like 30s or 40s issue in their issue count. It's amazing.
And I mean, when was the last time anything was published for it?
In the 80s.
so two active fanzines still going for it is pretty.
Yeah, to have them. I mean,
good,
yeah, and they actually the fan group even secured early on before the Evil Hat kind of trademark takeover attempt. They had secured a limited license to even reproduce their own remastered versions of the original rules and modules. So they had them all reformatted and stuff like that. But now TSR is selling those on drive-thru, so you can get all of that. But they still have a limited fan license to produce fan content and use all the stuff. It's actually it's an official fanzine. If
right, yeah, it has the official tag.
They have a license.
Yes, yes.
But no, it's cool. But yeah, that's just speaking of modules. I didn't know it was going to be show and tell, or I would have brought some of mine up. Of course, they're scattered in my basement across the.
I didn't know what to expect. As I say, but my weekly videoing planning and all that thing is completely disrupted by the fact I have to be silent when I'm in the room at the or just talk quietly into the microphone, because I have a 17-year-old through that wall behind me who will screech at me if she can hear me. So I'm just having to be a little bit respectful at the moment.
Hey, at least she cares about her studies enough to screech at you.
Yeah, she's very serious about them, and she turns 18 in 2 days as well. So
yeah, mine are all grown too. So, but.
All right, so let's continue show and tell, shall we? Let's continue show and tell. Here you go. Another fairly big one that I've never run that I don't like.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Yes. Spider ships. No, thank you.
I couldn't remember if it was in D3 or Q1. I'm horrible with module numbers, so.
Yeah, for me, Q1 was just a shame. Just a shame. They could have done so much with that.
Isn't it kind of in the same kind of the same situation as Temple of Elemental Evil, where it was sort of a promise not fulfilled by the original creator, envisioner? Yeah.
Yeah.
I hate that module. I got to go through it with probably the most horrible infighting, unbalanced party back when it came out. I had a Cavalier from Unearthed Arcana, and I had so many more hit points and such better armor that they kept making me go first.
Well, you will do, because you are the battering ram for the.
Yeah, but by the end of it, like by the end of the time that we stopped playing because we just couldn't get through it, because it was just not fun. I had lost my Cavalier had lost a hand. It was scarred horribly, and we had psionic thieves in the party wanting to steal everybody's stuff. So
joy. Yeah, my group had a Cavalier who, after the magic user had learnt the haste spell, he quickly became middle-aged. It became a recurring tactic to make the Cavalier old. So, but I have put in my pile of unused my copy of Temple of Elemental Evil, though I've realised I made a mistake putting it there, because even though I run the Village of Homlet separately, I have actually run the Nulb chapter of this, so it shouldn't really be in this pile.
So it's partially used.
Partially used. I've never run it beyond Nulb. I've never run the temple itself. I've tried reading it. Tried reading it and put it away, and try reading it again and put it away. It's just a module. Yes, Vault of the Drow will be hard work, but for me, there's it's deserving of that work, and you know that it's going to give you that work, that could involve that work, and it's only 32 pages. The Temple is just like 128 pages that the DM has to go through and digest and dissect and try and make to work because it's so erratically put together. Anyway,
let's see what else is in my collection. So many games, so many different games.
What have you got that?
Well, I have the horrible curse of also being the guy in our gaming group who loves to pick up smaller independent games.
Right.
That nobody wants to play because they're not mainstream. So every, science fiction games, pulp games, all kinds of different genres. But as far as D&D goes, I still play that. But I also have RuneQuest, which
I played one session of RuneQuest.
Yeah, RuneQuest. It's a different flavor of fantasy, and it's worth it enough in my mind to play that as a change of flavor from D&D. But I have a feeling that if I was to want to play it now, I'd want to run it with the Call of Cthulhu 7th edition style rules, because there's such a great refinement of that Chaosium system.
Yeah.
And what's really dumb is Chaosium keeps putting out new content that uses like the 6th edition version instead of 7th edition. Well, they did Dark Ages, I think they did that with. It's like, why would you do that?
I learned Call of Cthulhu by playing 6th edition. It might have even been 5th edition. I can't remember which one the keeper was using, but they're very, very similar all the way through 1st through to 6th. They're so similar. And then I tried 7th, and initially I thought, well, didn't it go against the point of the game to make it all just a little bit easier? And then I realized, well, it doesn't make it all that much easier. You've still got to be very careful. You're still very fragile. Yeah. Okay, you might succeed on a few more rolls, but you're still going to die if you do anything stupid.
Well, the one thing I really like about it is that all of the pushes that they gave it to give a little bit more, I don't know, dynamic chance to it, like the pushing the rolls thing kind of a thing.
Yeah.
They still they're balanced enough, so if you push that roll and you still fail, the fallout's even worse than if you would have just failed.
Is, yeah.
I love that. And the idea check, I mean, the no roll or whatever it is, that's kind of a good one, because we've all been in those places in games where the players are just stumped. But I haven't found it to be any simpler. The nice thing about 7th edition is it's easily backwards compatible with anything else.
Yeah.
Simple math, simple enough math that you can do it on the fly.
Well, I mean, the thing is, with using luck, with burning luck points to help with your rolls and things like that.
No, that's only an optional rule, though.
Yeah, but it works. It works. And it allows the players it gives them another resource that they can expend, and they
especially considering luck is near impossible to recover.
So, yeah, it is. It's extremely hard.
I actually learned to play Chaosium through Stormbringer and the old ElfQuest RPG from back in the 80s.
So, we have a Doof arriving. And Graham. Oh, it looks like we're going to get busy.
Cool.
Looks like we're going to get busy. So, here comes Doof.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Yeah, all right, Doof. Hello. And
just came
and Graham.
Hi, Doof.
Graham was one of Saturday night's successful adventurers in the sinister secret of Saltmarsh. He still needs to get his XP because I haven't done it yet.
No problem. I know you were busy last weekend.
But so where were we anyway? We're talking about Chaosium, weren't we?
Yeah, and in general, like just so much. I mean, where do you even start with games you haven't played? It's like, there's more of those than games I have played. So
Yeah.
Before we come to just games, remember, I'm just going to finish going through my stack of D&D modules here. So
okay.
Here's 2 more that I haven't ever run. And those of you who know the modules I like might be surprised to see that I haven't run either of those 2. Just haven't got around to it.
I thought about doing all the glitters as well, but then I didn't need it. I thought I was going to tag it onto Isle of Dread.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, didn't need it in the end, but it's one I'll probably come back to at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I've read them both. They both look as good as the rest of the UK series, which is a great series.
Right.
So that's why I haven't reviewed them. And there's this one as well. Not run that.
Right.
Because I ran a party through EX1 and they all died. Then we've got that one. I haven't run that one.
I've done that. That's you can do that solo, can't you? That does tie in with Isle of Dread very well.
Yes, it does. Yes.
Specularum.
And then we've got my only Judges Guild product that I still own, still in its shrink wrapping.
Oh, cool.
And something that was being discussed on a chat channel I was on the other night.
Oh, I love the Roll Aid stuff. The stuff was always good.
So, and one, I'm something that might make a few of you laugh. It has a reputation for possibly being the worst adventure ever written. It came free with the 2nd edition Dungeon Master's screen. I've never even opened it to look at it because it's got such a bad reputation. Anywho, so let's give Doof and Graham a chance to join in. Doof, you all right, Doof?
Yo, nah, I just saw here that you guys were talking about system you hadn't run, which
yes, have you got a system?
I see the opportunity to shell Earthdawn. Holy shit! Now that is a system I run it once, barely, because that session was ass. But it is one of those systems. It's a 90s RPG, fantasy RPG system. So of course it has a lot of skills, and it is rather complex. But holy shit, it is cool.
I know Max from Legion of Myth bangs on about Earthdawn a lot.
Oh yeah, it is a very different flavor of fantasy to Dungeons and Dragons. It's a lot more about cosmic. It has cosmic horror while still being high fantasy, which is it sounds not a very good mix, but it manages to pull it off rather nicely.
I like a bit of cosmic horror. I do like a bit of cosmic horror. It's very magical, though, isn't it, from what I've heard?
Indeed. All of the classes involve some sort of magic. While, yeah, the spellcasters, of course, are the ones who are actively manipulating it. Every discipline is magical. You get magical abilities like magical healing or in elemental powers as a fighter, etc.
Well, maybe you can run it for us. Well, do you think it'll work okay through Discord?
Yeah, definitely. I don't see why it wouldn't work.
There's a challenge for you then. About a couple of streams ago, I managed to get Saxius to commit to letting me get involved in one of his games. He still hasn't come through with that. So, Graham, what have you got that you've never run?
I think I'm with Elfbait, where there's more adventures that I haven't run than ones that I have or played in. There's just loads in the the information age, and I quite interested in Mastora and Karamikos, and there's just a ridiculous amount of story hooks in there. Too many to play, really. It's like I like things to integrate quite well, so I'm just choosing the ones that integrate. But in the first Gazetteer, there's just it's just an endless list of plot hooks, really.
Obviously, each plot hook requires a lot of work on your part to flesh out. So
Yeah, it does, and especially if you want to make it reasonably integral. I mean, it's great that people can add their own material and homebrew, but it's inevitable that different people have got different ideas. If they're being creative, they're not going to all head in the same direction. That would be unfair. So it's a bit of a balance, really.
right, so systems. There's one system that I've owned for a few years that I've not run. I've heard so many good things about it. I've tried to digest that rule book. Played half a session of it with me with somebody else running it, but
is it similar to D&D, or is it very different?
It's much more story based. I can't remember a lot. Oh, Doof's disappeared. I can't remember a lot about it. I remember being frustrated because there's no dice involved in character creation, and I like a bit of randomness in character creation. But it's beautiful. It's one of those books that sits on the shelf and just looks lovely, with gorgeous artwork throughout and gorgeous presentation. And whoever's written it has obviously spent hours and hours and hours just sort of putting it all together, and it just looks lovely. And so I'd like to give it a go sometime. I just never fathomed it out.
Right.
Never fathomed it out.
There's a 3.5 setting that I owned that I've never got a chance to run, and it's been re-released for 5th edition, but it kept its teeth, and that's the Midnight setting. It was a 3.5 D&D campaign setting, but One Ring brought it back to mind, because it's basically the creative basis for that one, if you're not familiar, is Lord of the Rings, but Sauron 1.
Ooh.
And so it's this dark fantasy world where there are god kings, and you're all trapped on the world. Everybody's trapped on the world with the one evil overlord, the evil god, because all the other gods imprisoned him in a prison on that world. The problem is, like, nobody can get out, so everybody's cut off from their gods. Magic's forbidden, so it's kind of low magic. Magic users are actively hunted down. Clerics are all hamstrung because they don't have the access to their gods anymore. In a lot of ways, it's Dark Sunny, but it's very much written with that Tolkien-esque kind of feel to it, but it's not just a Tolkien ripoff.
Did you say it's using the 3.5e rules though?
The original one was.
Right.
It actually was originally written in 3rd edition, got an update to 3.5, but they just announced that they've done it, that they're doing it for 5th edition. They're doing pre-orders now, or maybe even in the order stage. But the nice thing about the 5th edition version is evidently they've kept it dark and dangerous, even with 5th edition. So,
well, I'm wondering if they've taken a bit of a lead from another one in my pile of things I've not used.
wouldn't be surprised.
Because that's something that, to me, these books proved that 5th edition can work absolutely fine, or at least looks like it should work absolutely fine, with all the magic stripped out. Because I can't see any reason why the mechanics in here would not work, and they've been very lovingly written again. They look beautiful. I have read most of it. I've never run it. I played in one session that I thoroughly enjoyed.
I think the secret, honestly, is you can get people to play a grittier 5th edition as long as you don't call it 5th edition. If you say, "Hey guys, I want to play 5e, and let's take out this, let's take out this, let's take out this, take out this," then they're like, "I don't want to play." But if you're like, "I've got Adventures in Middle Earth," and which is just 5th edition with, like you said, all the tweaks to it that make it darker and grittier and stuff. So
yeah, it's got the slower healing. It's got say none of the classes have magic. It's got obviously all the monsters are directly out of Tolkien, and it's got those lovely rules regarding traveling and creating a sanctuary, and one thing I do like about it is it puts a bit of niche. You know how D&D stripped out the niches of a lot of the classes?
yeah, niche protection is still in there.
It's still in there, yeah. Because you have to decide who is going to do what role on a journey. So people have to have these specialities, and if you're missing that particular role for a journey, then something horrible is going to happen to you. And the game is all about the journey.
Well, that's the teamwork, isn't it? When you're good at some things and other characters are good at other things.
Yeah, it's one of the big things I do miss in 5e, but mainly, even as a DM, because I'm mostly mostly run games. I miss the challenge that I could see with the players trying to figure out what to do when maybe they didn't have access to something, or they had expended their uses of things. What do you do when you're down in the dungeon and your wizard is out of spells?
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. They've
you just fall back on a feat or a class ability, or somebody else has got a subclass that gives them magic anyways.
And of course, wizards have cantrips that they can just keep spamming, which are about as effective as a low-level warrior class shooting a bow.
Yeah,
and they can do it round after round after round.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, there are times when I'm totally down for a 5th edition feel game. If I want to play like a high fantasy heroic adventure, that's definitely the system I would want to go to.
Yeah, it does that very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do crave the olden days.
There is something to be said for the players spending time on a plan, and it being so obvious that it's the players that are doing the work, rather than just looking at their character sheets and trying to synergize what their characters can do.
I've seen players paralyzed by their character sheets too.
Yeah, I have as well.
In 5th edition, it's just like, yes, what do you do? Yeah. And I'm like, I still have a problem when my current group is 6 levels into their characters, and they're still forgetting abilities. They're still forgetting magic items they picked up on the way. That's the other thing. Your magic items don't really count anymore for much. So it's easy, like as a DM, I'll put some cool magic item in their way and they'll get it and they just don't use it because they just forget that they have it. But that's not what we're here to talk about.
No. Anyhow, let's have a look and see what some people have been saying. Seeing as Saxius has decided to join us, Saxius has, we've already mentioned Spelljammer, Dark Sun, Forgotten Realms. Yeah. The only question I would ask here is, if you're running a homebrew setting and you own all these settings, you are likely to bring in aspects of them into your own setting to draw from them ideas, I would have thought.
Yeah. I know
Am
that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
am I completely off track there? But
No, because when I mean, I play mostly homebrew, and there in my old campaign world that I've retired, from high school, the big deserty place in the campaign setting was basically Dark Sun, just plopped down. We took it pretty much whole cloth. The area was once a fertile area, and the wizards there were power mad, so they stripped the land, and now it's a giant desert. And it was a great way to explain those weird Gygaxian deserts that existed in Greyhawk. That you're like, why is there a desert here? And so it works. You can definitely do that. Like Ravenloft, if you were to take Strahd and take him out of the mists and just put him in some Alpine Valley somewhere, it's just as effective.
Yeah.
So I mean, why not?
You just need somewhere where you can put a big spooky castle on a rocky outcrop and make it really misty and foresty, and it'll fit anywhere.
In my old campaign setting, we turned basically the whole concept of Ravenloft into another empire. We called it Ravanya, and it was the big, Slavic Eastern European expanse where all the spooky things. You went into a village and all the houses had iron spikes embedded in the thatch on their roof, sharpened spikes pointing up, and they had metal grates over their chimneys and fishing nets over their windows, and all the sorts of superstition and stuff because they were afraid of things getting in. And you would take anything from a campaign setting and you would just plunk it down into your world. Anytime we wanted a different style of play, it was just a new nation in our campaign setting.
That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. So, I mean, if you're doing that, you're using that material, aren't you? You are even if you're not using it straight out of the book, you are.
You're inspired by it, I suppose. I mean, I just found out that a house like Strahd's could fit into Karamikos. There's a village, and I just on the coast, and I just found that out this week. But even if I know what you mean. Even if you think you're changing it or inventing something new, really you're going to be inspired by the things that you've read before or done before.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the next thing I'm going to wave on here, I see Saxius has mentioned he's got the complete Psionics book for 2E. I've got that. I've never used it. I couldn't find it to put it on my pile, but there we go. I think that book is a lovely read. I love the history in there. I love the
I found
style of it.
The Celt book was really useful.
Yeah, I've not used any material in it, but I probably have inadvertently been inspired by it, and my opinion of Paladins is probably inspired by it.
I love the fact that they have the rules for Christianity in there, and then they have alignment any. I'm like, oh, you're so lucky that book didn't come out like 5 years earlier. What do you mean you can have lawful evil Christian priests?
Well, all you have to do is read a couple of history books, and you find that there's a lot of variation. But I was wondering if that book you had there, John, would fit with Castle Amber. Is it a similar sort of flavour to it?
What, Charlemagne's Paladins?
Yeah.
I don't know. No, I wouldn't say so because it's Castle Amber's so whimsical. Well, not really whimsical. It's so oddly fantastical. Whereas these source books are very much bringing the fantasy down to ground level.
Perhaps the wilderness around Castle Amber, then, depending on how a person wanted to create that area.
I mean, Elfbates mentioned the Celts book. If you want to make that, depending on how developed you want the wilderness to be and how developed you want the people in that wilderness to be, the Celts book might be a better one for it.
Right.
Because they did about 7 or 8 of these books, all on different historical eras.
Right.
There's a Romans one, there's a Greeks one, there's
Crusade,
the Crusades, yeah.
Vikings.
Yes, yeah. And Age of Ships, I think was one of them, wasn't it?
I think so. Whereas basically all Age of Sail pirate stuff.
Yes, yeah. And yes, but all of them are very much designed to be very historically themed. So you're dragging the fantasy back and making everything just feel that bit more grounded.
Right.
I do like that the Celts book had warrior feats. If you remember those, they were really cool stuff, like being able to throw spears with your feet and do the salmon leap and use the sharpened edge of your shield as a weapon.
Oh yeah, maybe that. I need to go back and reread this one because it's been a few years since I've reread this. Charlemagne's
Every one of
Paladin.
those I owned had something that I plucked out of it to put into my games. I think from the Vikings one, we ended up with characters who were troll-blooded and giant-blooded and stuff like that. Who had that ancient lineage. So there's like you're saying, no matter whether you actually play in the setting, you're gonna pull stuff from it.
And I think of that series, certainly the ones with the most mileage will be the Vikings one and maybe the Greek one, because so much is drawn from those eras in terms of feel.
Really tempted to run a 5e game that is. I mean, they have the Theros book, so that's a good start. But I want to run like a very Bronze Age of Mythology campaign where the monsters you fight are the monster, not one of many. Like, you have killed the Chimera, you have fought the Medusa.
Yeah,
and play it for yucks, play it for fun, and have the characters just revel in being these heroic monster slayers, and rather than the typical adventurer, where it's kind of a gritty, grimy guy who barely gets by.
Well, at local level, it would seem like the monster, the vampire. If communication wasn't that great, and most people walk or rode, they
Well, that is true. Yeah, that is true.
May have felt like that.
That's true. Although they do have some cool rules for doing epic level monsters and stuff in Theros. So,
that Theros one, one of my group has it and has just started running it, and I'm playing in it. We're 2 sessions into it at the moment.
Oh yeah.
So far, it's been interesting. I mean, for me, the jury's out a little bit in that I like games to be a little more grounded, and of course, with how it's set, you begin a little more heroic. But that's because it is based on the ancient Greek myths.
Seems like piling it on a little much for 5th edition, though, because you're already so heroic in 5e.
I'm challenging myself in it as well, and I nearly always play human because I believe that it is so difficult to genuinely play another race which would think more differently. So I have challenged myself, and I'm playing a satyr in it, and I'm trying to force myself to act in a more bestial way, with different priorities to how I have no idea how a satyr should act, but I'm just trying to make him a lot more animalistic. It's been odd so far, but we'll see how it goes. Next session is Monday, so we'll see how it goes. And he's still alive. I think he's now level 2.
That's cool. I do like the faith rules that they integrated into that.
Yeah, that seems good. That seems really good.
It's something I've for the longest time been trying to pull out of Harn was the piety rules for the old Harn system. Having clerics have to actually do something to have their power and keep their power is an appealing thing to me, as a DM at least.
I will say that I've got a qualification in ancient Greek history, and people are commenting about playing a satyr. Something I have brought into it, and I'm still not sure whether I should have done, but we are all adults, is that I am playing a satyr and not a faun. So those who know their Greek mythology will know the difference between the two, and that it can be quite an adult difference.
Yeah.
basically, and I'm doing it to make a bit of a point, because
one of them is the way that everybody likes to play their character when they're 10. But
and but the problem is, for me, if you're basing something on Greek mythology, they should never have called the race satyr, because the picture in the book is a faun and not a satyr. Yeah. Anyway, that's me being a proper pedant.
As I say, it is fantasy. So.
It is, yes, it is. But I'm still a pedantic old man. Anyhow. Right. What else have we got here that I've never used? Oh. Any of you ever played that?
I have, actually.
I've not played it. I'm going to use it later, but I've not played it. Is it good?
I've played the first edition battle system. I've never played the second edition.
Right.
Yeah, we had a 3 players big, not huge group, all who started building up 15 millimeter armies from scratch, specifically to play that back in the 90s. It was pretty good. We had one guy with a massive hobgoblin horde, another guy who had a giant Japanese themed army, and then there was me with my giant elf host, and it was pretty cool. The only problem I had was they gave you rules on how to convert from the monster manual and from PCs into the miniatures rules. They didn't give you rules on how to give them points values.
Oh, right.
So you kind of had to guess.
You mean experience point values, or
no actual point values, because it's a miniatures game, and the idea was the whole point-based army build kind of a concept. If you're just doing purely role play, it's not an issue. But if you were playing it as standalone as a miniatures game, then they had a point system in there by which you could buy armies to make sure that they were balanced and stuff like that.
Oh,
so
like a ranking.
To say to Halakha, I did play the first edition battle system. It's specifically the second edition one I've never played, and the rules are quite different from skimming through them. It looks like they've attempted to streamline them somewhat in second edition.
Yeah, they also made a skirmish version of it too.
Yeah, I've seen that. I haven't got it, but I've seen it.
So what sort of level, character level, is appropriate when you start using skirmishes and battle systems? Somewhere around mid-level, I would have thought.
So my impression was that the skirmish system was just for those folks who wanted to play out fights and weren't really playing them as part of a campaign necessarily. Because, I mean, honestly, if you're playing a handful of guys on each side and it's part of a campaign, you might as well just be role-playing it, right?
Yeah.
The battle system was put in there initially. The original version was to give a mass combat system for second edition, I think, if I recall correctly. It's been a while. And then they did that one box set that had the big battle with the Triceratops riding barbarians on the cover or something like that. I can't remember. They had a bunch of paper cutouts.
I've got that first edition box set.
Yeah, and that was
You see
designed
it, I can't
really.
reach it.
really bring in a mass combat system for D&D that was able to be played as a standalone game also. But yeah, I would say from what I remember, the intention was you were supposed to start pulling that out kind of at the same point where your characters are getting strongholds and followers, where you're actually starting to, or if you had some massive, or if you had some massive event in a module or an adventure you're running,
as Halakar said,
your characters.
There was the H series of modules, and they were for character levels 15 plus.
Yeah,
right.
They were. I thought H1 was quite good. But it got progressively sillier.
I think they even had battle system stats in some of the later Dragonlance modules.
They did, yeah.
Yeah.
DL11, I think.
Yeah.
There's one, in terms of the values of the DL series, there's one that's worth about 10 times more than all the others. It's either DL11 or DL12, one of those, and that's the battle system one.
Yeah.
Right.
We had a lot of fun with it. We were all miniatures gamers also, so there was extra added value, but the idea of being able to integrate miniatures play into our D&D games was just so many pluses.
I was a bit put off by miniature wargaming. I had one friend at school who played a lot of miniature war games. He was well into his war games, and I used to go round his house on a Sunday afternoon, and he'd make me play Warhammer with him. And I'm sure he'd just give me a crap army and just beat my and whatever I seemed to roll, nothing ever seemed to work. I'd end up with none of my forces left, and he'd barely be touched, and he'd be there with a big smug grin on his face. He never taught me the rules properly. As well.
I've kind of been miniatures gaming as long as I've been tabletop RPG gaming, because early on, my original group and we had access to a really good shop locally that had everything that came out, everything from Martian miniatures to Asgard miniatures to Ral Partha, Grenadier, any of that they sold. And we each kind of carved out a niche for ourselves. Like Brian would go to the pegs and pull all the goblins off the pegs, and my buddy would pull all the dwarves off the pegs, and I would go pull all the elves off the pegs, and we would just start making up really simple battle systems to play with them on our dining room table. And it was all based on, this guy's a small creature, so he rolls a D4. This guy's a human-sized creature, so he rolls a D6. This guy's bigger, he rolls a D8, and just that was our very early on combat. We would play that separate from D&D. Of course, then having all those miniatures was really useful when we started playing D&D, because then we could just pull them out.
And I bet those memories are still great, because it's that sort of those are those days of innocence when you're just making your own fun.
That and all those wonderful, weird, skewed memories as being a kid and realizing that nobody had figured out the rating system for miniatures yet. And so you're going there to paint your orcs, and you turn them upside down, and you realize he's anatomically correct under that chainmail skirt. And then my buddy Brian had this giant troll with a club that was naked and fully equipped.
Right.
And he was nicknamed the Two-Headed Troll for reasons. But we're all 10, and Brian was 4 years older than us, so he's 14.
One of the few books to survive my cull in around 2000 was my original Monster Manual, which I got when I was 12-ish. And I'm just looking. Oh, there we go. I coloured in a few of them. And there we go.
Yep.
Can you see? I have coloured in the nipples. Yes.
We colored our books. Some of us were dumb enough to even use colored markers on our books, so they bled through to the other side of the page.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, there's some Tipp-Ex on one of them here. I attempted to fix a bit of bad colouring. It's appalling. There you go. My blue dragon done with coloured markers, and I've Tipp-Ex'd around. I made a mistake.
The lad that introduced me to D&D had coloured in some of his basic set and Keep on the Borderlands, and I just thought it was fantastic, like a new world, a different world with strange creatures like bugbears and owlbears and stuff. I thought it was great.
I always remember just back then not having a clear idea what was and what wasn't D&D and just grabbing anything that looked like it fit.
Yes.
You know, whether, I don't know how many Harn books or RuneQuest books and stuff we had grabbed just because they had cool knights and castles and monsters, and it doesn't matter. We was talking about you'll use anything in your games.
Yeah.
Also, I remember back then, though, everything that was published had a set of conversion pages in the back on how to convert to D&D.
Yeah.
Like the Roll-Aid stuff was really good like that.
Oh yeah, people have often said. I mean, I began with the Beck-Me and basic sort of line, and I had when I got the advanced D&D books, I just thought they were the same game. I just thought they were just use bits and pieces. I wasn't aware of any of the politics that had gone on with them, and I wasn't aware they were intended to be completely different games. I just used bits of each one, and
we went through Isle of Dread with AD&D characters. So
why not?
Yeah.
It works.
I think the power levels between the two versions were relatively the same, anyways. So it wasn't like trying to go 5th edition to old school where you'd have to like really try to convert the encounters a lot.
I think it comes out in the wash with the two systems. Somebody did a video on combat with BX and versus 5e, and it's different. It's not the same, but overall the monster player balance there's not that much in it, because I had a bit of trouble at first when I was trying to convert for Isle of Dread, but it kind of works out in the end.
Yeah, I think that was Matt Colville that did that, wasn't it?
I can't remember his name. It's a good while since I saw it, but
I think the takeaway on that was that monsters seem to have more hit points, but also characters are hitting harder, and monsters are also hitting harder despite the heavier hit points. The biggest takeaway is the post-battle fallout is much different.
Yes, that's
and because my 5th edition characters sleep it off and get up going the next day.
And it feels things are a little less swingy in 5th edition.
Yeah.
Like for example, you fight an ogre. It's got such a bad armor class and such a massive amount of hit points. Your character's just hitting it every single time for very consistent amounts of damage. It does feel like a sack of hit points. Whereas at least playing the older editions of the game, your chances of hitting it were lower, but if you rolled a maximum on your damage with a longsword, you might feasibly drop it in one hit.
Yeah, I pay a lot of attention to the design of 5th edition. I know they talked about how they wanted to make the monsters to where they would stay in the fight a little longer. Like a goblin is designed now to actually take about 1.5 hits, or 2 up to maybe 3 if you roll really badly, because they didn't want goblins to just disappear, because they want them to stay a threat at up to higher levels with the whole grounded accuracy or bounded accuracy thing. The one thing that my kind of takeaway statement is, as a DM, in older editions, the game was just dangerous by default.
Mm-hmm.
In 5th edition, I really have to try to make it dangerous. And to me, that makes me kind of feel bad, because I've never been an adversarial DM, but it feels almost like I have to be in 5th edition. I really have to lean into that DM versus player, and I have to overbuild my encounters to make them dangerous, or I have to play my monsters particularly cagey. In the old version, it was just the roll of the dice could swing it.
Yeah.
It was very much more a game. And that's the other thing that a lot of people who want to bag on older systems, I think, miss out on, is that we played it back then much more as a game, I think. Or we at least accepted that it was a game, and not that it was this big, grand, dramatic experience
I mean,
So
we're going to hark back to
Yeah.
the last Saturday's game, Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. I did mention at the start of the stream, Graham's group managed to storm the ship at the end, and it was the dice that essentially enabled them to do that. In the end, because they won initiative every single round. Whenever they hit the boss, who had 41 hit points, which is a massive amount for level 1 and 2 characters to take out, they did maximum damage against him.
Yeah, but that the good thing about that was that I still had the feeling that okay, we're outnumbered, we're doing a frontal assault. This could go very, very badly. There was very, as though death was a real jeopardy, or the end of one's character, which nobody wants to see. But it wasn't like, we've got this covered sort of thing. It wasn't that kind of feeling.
Well, congratulations! You now have a ship and the means to completely derail his campaign. You can go anywhere in the world now.
They've earned it. They've earned it. Yeah,
it's also what makes Saltmarsh such a good starting module. If you really want to think about it, I think I mentioned before in another one that it's the start of my nautical campaign. That's set to be far away from it, but it's such a perfect adventure for setting that up. So I don't think they'll ever play the other two modules in this series unless they decide to stick around town. But
well, we're going to move on to U2 next, so we'll see what happens.
Right.
Let's see what happens. All right, something else I've never used. Let's have a look at something. I'll wave that quickly. You can see how much I paid for that. £5.
nice.
Wow.
I don't intend to ever run it. I bought it on a whim. That was a Games Expo purchase. I saw it there for £5.
Isn't that the compilation of the first two campaigns for 5th edition?
No, it's the first part of that section of that first two campaigns.
Oh, that's right. That became Tyranny of Dragons.
Yeah. It's got
They're great to mine. They're great to mine for stuff.
I probably will mine it. But here's something I really, really want to run this, and this is one adventure, and I'm scared, and there's a reason. The size of it.
At least it's not Oriented Express.
And it's just how big? How many? 420 something pages.
I hear that those Call of Cthulhu campaigns are not just campaigns. I mean, they're a lifestyle.
Yeah. This one goes into it's all about an expedition to Antarctica, and it goes into the detail of all the planes that are available, what they can carry, how much space, everything, all the various items that you might take on an expedition to Antarctica, how much space they will use on a plane, how much fuel everything uses. There's an appendix.
Oh, good.
It's an appendix at the back which just runs through all the details and all the cargo lists of all different types of ship. It's insane. Yeah. It is absolutely insane in its detail.
One of my favorite parts about designing adventures or scenarios for Call of Cthulhu, because I have yet to run a published scenario. I can't do modules. You're like pulling up all these modules and stuff. I think the last time I ran a module I was 12. But I like to homebrew this stuff, but the research that I end up doing for all of the props and stuff for Call of Cthulhu, because that's just part and parcel. I'm looking up old 1920s, cruise line schedules and routes and pulling photos of expeditions and stuff. I think we lost the geek.
He'll be back.
Yeah, I love pulling the research.
Yeah, I was just muted, but I was just saying that there's a lot of historical info that could be brought in on any of these adventures. Antarctica or Greek mythology, whichever direction you want to go.
Oh yeah. Or because of a lot of the weird, so much of the Lovecraftian stuff takes place in the U.S. Native American stuff you can pull in,
Right.
even just weird old lumberjack folklore. You can draw from for Call of Cthulhu stuff. We kind of leaned into Bigfoot myths in one of our our scenarios. It wasn't Bigfoot, but people thought it was Bigfoot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of suggestive when you place something like that, and then you can reveal a different end to the story.
Well, and there's even some of the classic Lovecraftian monsters are sort of written that way, as in like this is the origin of the actual folk belief and stuff. Like one of the things like the Vormis or whatever it is have frequently been written as like where the Norse got the idea for trolls and things like that. So
yeah,
or they lean the other way, like the Lovecraftian creature is drawn from this weird concept of cannibalistic pygmies that live in the jungle.
Yeah.
Like the Chochos.
I suppose that's where you just go with. It's a bit different if you're making homebrew monsters, but in D&D there were some people that criticised how exactly what the folklore is about trolls compared to a D&D troll, and there's no point really. You just play trolls as they're written in the rules, and if you know more about the folklore that's specific, well that's great, but don't try and change the game, or the rules that have been.
Well, yeah, I mean, Gygax based his trolls on specific trolls from a book, so I rewrote trolls completely to be like their Norse, closer to their Norse equivalents, but that was just me. That's in my campaign.
I hope you were behaving yourselves while I had internet issues.
It was a total takeover. But you've been ousted.
Yes. I was talking about Mountains of Madness, and I know Saxius works with spreadsheets, and I have to say that would be absolute.
Oh, he's frozen.
That adventure would be porn for him.
So what do they find when they get to Antarctica, or is that the adventure? Or can be...
That would be telling.
They find snow, lots and lots of snow.
I can tell you that they find the Mountains of Madness, and whatever's beyond.
Right. Wow. that clears that up then.
Who would have thunk it?
Who'd have thunk it, eh? Who'd have thunk it? Right. It's good to see that chat are getting on so well as well. They appear to be having a lovely discussion. I'm going to correct Patrice, where he mentions G1. But who said, someone said something about G1 update. Someone's brought up G1. G1 was 8 pages long. It was all of 8 pages. Anyway, what were you chatting about while I was gone?
Oh, just the fun of setting up Call of Cthulhu Adventures and the fun research you can get into just on all the fiddly bits, kind of going into your details about planes. I'm saying how I pulled up old shipping schedules and the menus off of cruise lines and, event itineraries. I've got a whole camp. Yeah, and he's gone again. I've got Virgin's out to get him. I've got a
Oh,
campaign.
no, it's my internet connection just keeps playing.
Yeah, I've got a campaign I'm working on that takes place on a transatlantic cruise. Starts in the Middle East and then goes out through the Mediterranean, then across to New York. And I'm looking up all this stuff.
You say you don't use modules, but that.
All right, you're back. I don't use modules, but
It's breaking up a bit.
Have you looked up? Yeah, it's my internet connection. It's
yeah.
I'm afraid. If you're doing that sort of travel related campaign, have you got a copy of Horror on the Orient Express to draw inspiration from?
I do. There's also a couple of older edition scenarios that take place specifically on ships, and so a lot of the little encounters and stuff.
I've seen a couple of those.
Yeah, so I've just got to scale it up. It's actually really inspired by, there was a Spanish-made murder mystery series that went on for like 3 seasons that was all on a cruise ship recently, and I can't remember the name of it for the life of me, but I watched that. I'm like, this is a Call of Cthulhu campaign. This right here is this. I mean, all you have to do is insert cultists and fishmen or snake people, or I mean, the 3rd season even involves like a ghost. I mean,
yeah, just have some crewmen sacrificing a random old lady on the ship to a demonic idol, and there you go, you're off.
Well, the whole kickoff for the campaign is that the PCs are babysitting an item recovered from the deserts of the Middle East that they're trying to get to New York. And it's sitting in the hold, and every comic hilarity ensues as they're stuck on a ship for ever in luxury, but they're stuck on a ship.
And that's what makes the horror, isn't it? Because they are stuck on that ship, and they have to. They can't get away.
Yeah. Bigger, more possibilities than being stuck on a train, I suppose, because there's more space on a ship, more people, more different parts to it.
Yeah, and with a huge cruise ship, there's so many people on there. Like, who is the bad guy? You can even have multiple plots going on there that are not connected. There's so many people.
Yeah, that's one of the things about the Beyond the Mountains of Madness. There's so many. It takes into account the journey from Europe all the way down to Antarctica.
Yeah,
and you are on a ship, and things are going wrong. And why are things going wrong? Who's doing it? What's doing it? What's going to go wrong next? And you're stuck on this ship.
I think the fun of Call of Cthulhu, honestly, is you can turn anything into a scenario. When I introduced my players to it, which was only a few years ago, because I had unfortunately been kept out of the game, because since the 80s, anytime I ever talk to anybody about the game, they're like, oh yeah, everybody dies, everybody goes insane, it's so cool. And I'm like, no, that doesn't sound like a good game. And even Sandy Peterson, the creator of the game, says that's not what it's all about. But
yeah,
anyway,
a lot of the one-shot adventures are designed to be a lot more lethal, to bring in those effects a lot more quickly. But yeah, the campaign ones.
There are healing rules and ways to get better from your insanity. So clearly, it's intended for a long-term play.
Yeah, I mean, my next book up is. I haven't played that book. That's volume 2. I have, however, played volume 1.
Somewhere there's a university offering credits in that module.
I ran my party through about 8 months of the first section of Horror on the Orient Express, and none of them died. There's plenty of them with dodgy insanities and plenty of maiming going on, and plenty of horrific moments.
Yeah,
and there's
only
a slow.
2 characters have gone out of my campaign.
Hmm.
One of them
Yes.
sacrificed himself, and the other one took some time off because she was getting a little low on sanity. You know? And my wife wanted to make a new character, so she wanted to play a different kind of character. So
I mean, the party had this deep south evangelical priest character who was the first one to go insane. And every station they stop at, he goes off to find a red light district and starts shouting at prostitutes, and gets himself arrested because he is obsessed with trying to save the souls of the women of the night. And it's become a total obsession. He's gone insane.
yeah, I have to say that Call of Cthulhu, after I finally got into it, is really fighting hard to eclipse D&D as my favorite game. I mean, it really just hits the mark for me as a person and the type of stories I like to tell. And any of my players will tell you there's some, for whatever reason, cosmic horror or eldritch horror has a tendency to slip into my D&D games too. So I just think there's a certain Cthulhu there that's just there all the time. But,
if I'm writing a D&D adventure, it will very commonly have something quite demonic and dark and horrific. And that's often Cthulhu influenced.
yeah.
Gents, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go. I've not had my dinner yet. I just wanted to call in. So thanks for the chat, and we'll catch you.
No problem. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining in, Graham. Thanks for joining in.
No problem, John. You're welcome. Yeah.
Have a good one.
And you. Cheers.
And we're back down to 2 with the prospect of Omanal coming in at some point.
I thought he was on the road.
Oh, he is, isn't he?
Yeah.
He is. He did say he might pop in if he can. So
can we tempt Saxius in?
Saxius, he's not home at the moment.
Oh, he's also on the road.
He's on the road somewhere. Yeah. Because I know he's saying he's got tons of stuff that he's never used.
I know there's you're not much of a science fiction guy, but there's a science fiction game that I have many books for that I would love to play, just never have found the group or the time to, and that's Blue Planet.
I can't say I've heard of it.
Oh, so Blue Planet, it's one of those games where it suffers for its system. It uses its own system, and honestly, it's one of those. But the concept is that Earth discovers a wormhole in our system, and it goes to this ocean planet that they, of course, name Poseidon. But they send an expedition there, but then everything goes belly up on Earth. Like there's this big agricultural crisis, and so Earth kind of shuts down. So this colony on Poseidon is disconnected for like 75 years or something like that. And then finally, once humanity kind of recovers itself, they decide to start exploring again. And so this ocean planet has an exploitable resource. So there's sort of a gold rush mentality. And there's this sort of they find that the waters there are full of this biosilica that is incredibly useful for biotech. It streamlines biotech, and so they can just filter it out of the water and collect it and stuff. But the reason I like the game is that it's sort of a cyberpunk future meets a little bit of a sci-fi future, because obviously you're on a different planet, but it's only one planet that we can get to. And that's only because happenstance. We don't have the tech to go anywhere else. We just happen to have this. But in this world, cybernetics are considered low rent. If you can't afford biotech, you're really kind of a backward sod. So, and also whales and dolphins are potentially playable races in there, because they have been uplifted, and they have drones that they interact with on land. But they're like, there's one of the corporations has an orca for its security chief. So it's kind of interesting. You have this weird bio, but it's played completely serious. They have a fully developed ecosystem for the world. Their monster book is written as a naturalist's guide. And
That's very nice, yeah.
And the neat thing is that the monster descriptions, monster quote unquote, because they're just, most of them are just animals, right? Are written from the standpoint that not everything is 100% understood, which for the GM, of course, is like, add your own stuff. And then there are mysteries on the world. Like, there are sounds coming from under the ocean that nobody can pinpoint. It's just this really rich environment that all takes place on a number of the few pieces of land that poke up above the water on this planet. And then underwater, and the tech is all nautical based. But yeah, it's a great game, and it's been beautifully put together in older black and white books. But yeah, just nobody to play. And the cool thing is, when it first came out, they actually donated a good chunk of their proceeds for selling the book to ocean research and recovery. So it even had an environmental angle on it.
I mean, I've never seen it. I'd never heard of it. So, but was this 80s, 90s?
It is a 90s game. The first edition was in the 90s. The second and third edition are within the 2000s. The newest edition, the third edition, because it got picked up by another company, maybe 10 years ago. So it's had a life. I think you can pick up the PDFs on drive-through, but it's pretty good.
I mean, certainly that monster book sounds very interesting.
Yeah, for nothing else, the monster book is the first one I picked up.
Yeah, and you could use that sort of approach in a lot of games, and I like it that it sounds like not everything. Well, there were details left to be filled in. That enables a DM to make it their own.
Yeah, I mean, even the original Monster Manual for D&D was sort of written in that way, to where here's the stats, but I always had the impression that what little ecology and stuff you had for the monsters was left intentionally vague, or maybe necessarily vague based on space in the book. But I think that's why everybody's table was so different back in the day.
Just bear with me, everyone. My wife is trying to get my attention. That was Mrs. Geek's arm.
I'm not a geek.
You are a geek.
I'm not a geek.
You watched all of Stranger Things.
That's as far as it goes with this.
Geek light.
Right, yes. She doesn't play RPGs. She does. She will play board games.
Board games.
Everybody's a nerd for something. Some people are just call themselves sports fans.
But you're in terms of this, you are Mrs. Geek. That's how people will know you. She's like, I'm not a geek. I'm not a geek. I'm a geek. Right, I've had to move all my books off where I had them, so completely lost where I was. Where were we?
G1 was about 16 pages long.
I am terrible at keeping up with chat. I'm absolutely atrocious. It's very nice that chat are able to just have these long conversations and completely ignore us. And we can completely ignore them.
Halakar was talking about the old Dark Tower board game.
Ah, I have heard of it. I've never
I
played
was
it.
obsessed with it. Neighbor kid had it, and I must have made him just absolutely sick of me begging to play it every time I'd go over to his house to play.
I have backed the Goodman Games Kickstarter for the new version of Dark Tower.
I think that Dark Tower is different, though. Is it different? I don't think it's related to the board game, is it?
Right. Okay. I didn't know. I didn't.
Yeah, I know that they did do a remake, a modern rebuild of the old electronic board game Dark Tower. It's pretty cool. Mages Musings.
Ah. Halakar knows it well. It might be something that was popular on your side of the Atlantic that never made it over here, or
Possibly.
possibly. Anyway, Lord Stephion says that I clicked on the wrong one there. I meant to click on that one. I find it odd to see something is Call of Cthulhu light, because to me Call of Cthulhu is a very light system to run.
If he's talking about Beyond the Supernatural, I would say it's more thematically so. Beyond the Supernatural is the Palladium system. My friends and I played it heavily, but we also started playing it when X-Files was a thing. And so we played it very X-Filey, where we were government investigators and stuff like that. Beyond the Supernatural placed a lot more power in the hands of the players, because you had some active psychic character classes and stuff like that. So it is. In respect to theme, I would say light, but because it uses the Palladium system, I would say it's system-wise heavier than Call of Cthulhu.
Isn't Delta Green sort of that sort of government agent type?
Yeah.
Cthulhu.
And Delta Green is its own variation on the Chaosium mechanics, as far as I understand it. It's very much a shoot the monster version of Call of Cthulhu. Sort of like the Pulp Cthulhu variant that came out for Call of Cthulhu.
If I'd have gone to the expo this year, I would have sought out a Delta Green game just to find out what it's like. So I've read a fair bit about it, just not played it. I've got so much normal Call of Cthulhu stuff I still want to go through before I start branching out to different versions of it.
When you play Call of Cthulhu, what time period do you play in?
I like the 1890s.
Yeah.
Of course, there's so much set in the 1920s, but I do quite like. I've got a few modern day ones that are good.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I prefer the 20s and 30s, because that's sort of the pulp era, and I have a soft spot for the pulp genre. I love the Phantom and Tarzan and all of that. And modern Call of Cthulhu is really tricky for me to run. I tried to run a campaign in modern times, and it went well, but I felt like I really had to be on my toes, because there's so many ways for people to get information and stuff like that.
Anyways, yeah. But it's an adventure I've shot for a fair bit. Forget Me Not is a modern day Cthulhu adventure, and it's just superb. It's absolutely superb. And it gets around the information. There are mechanics in the adventure to get around the information. The fact that you're stuck in a backwater helps. And in all likelihood, the characters, some of them might have phones on them, but they don't know. They've lost the whole point of it is that they've got no. They're trying to piece memories back, and so they don't know all these names in their phone. They don't even know if the phone belongs to them. They have to sort of work that out. So it's one of those things where, if they knew who they were and where they were and how to do everything, they might be able to, but they don't. They've got to relearn who they are.
Yeah, I think my take on playing modern Call of Cthulhu versus like 1920s or Gaslight is sort of the same angle that 5th edition versus older edition, even though it has nothing to do with editions. I think in modern Call of Cthulhu, the Keeper is really having to try harder to challenge the players in their investigation.
Yeah.
Whereas, in older time periods, just the nature of the setting allows for, kind of paces that investigation. So I'm having to figure out ways why they can't just pull out their smartphone and research everything, or I have to put blocks in, like, yeah, you can find information, but real useful information isn't going to be on the internet, or the police don't listen to you, which is kind of a tried and true for no matter what era you're in. But it's like, the monster is in your computer. It's like Sandy Peterson actually even suggested that one. He's like, the monster's actually, the players have smartphones and the players have the internet, but so do the cultists.
Well, yeah.
What happens when the cultists, use their police connections to fabricate evidence and put out an APB on the players?
Forget Me Not is the only modern day adventure I've run. I played in one that was set in the 1990s, so obviously there was a bit more technology about, but the internet was in its infancy.
The 1990s is about as late as I'd want to play it if I wanted to not have to worry about technology.
Yeah. But that was a good scenario, and then the DM, the Keeper, I keep calling him DM, the Keeper got around the information thing by just having, as he said, the monsters were messing with the technology of the place where we were. So everything was getting interfered with. CCTV wasn't working properly. We didn't have phones because of the nature of our situation. Various signals were being jammed. Worked pretty well.
Yeah, Lord Cephalion has a good one here. For modern, just work with the information age. Maybe there's too much information out there and some of it isn't exactly true. It's kind of what I was talking about. Also, is really useful dark esoteric information going to be even on the internet? I doubt the Gutenberg Project has translated the actual Cthulhu or the actual Necronomicon.
Exactly. Yeah. And anyone who's even attempted it is going to be insane.
Well, a good way too is to have veils of secrecy. I mean, you can also use that against the players a lot of times, because the mechanisms to conceal things are so much more developed nowadays. In one of my modern games, it started with, a troubled kid turned into a box of weird photos in Grandpa's attic and ended up in a bunker under the hills in Oregon. So, and meanwhile, the players are like, why does this bumpkin family have this super computer system? Why do they have this great surveillance system? What are we into? And like I said, it all started with looking into this local kid who had trouble, and his mom had reached out to resources that, because, child protective services and everything hadn't been useful, but the kid was having problems. And so my players were all kind of running this modern group where they had a podcast that they ran, a paranormal podcast, and so they went there to check it out. So
yeah, it's a lot and it's working, as you say, with the information, working with the technology. Anyway, where were?
let's see.
Anyways, Cephalion seems to like this topic.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. Imagine how many dumb kids might try summon, bind spells and fudge it.
Of course, that's a great adventure hook, too. I found this on the internet, and I tried it.
Speaking of, sort of dumb kids, have you ever played Tales from the Loop or Things from the Flood?
I have not.
I played Tales from the Loop at a convention, and it was very interesting. We all play in that you play the part of 11, 12, 13 year olds, and the concept of the game is that you can't get help from the adults because you are in your little sort of kids world, and you see things through kids' eyes, and adults are just weird creatures and they just ignore you.
I do have Kids on Bikes, which is a similar concept. I mean, both those games kind of came out right after Stranger Things, so
yeah.
Of course, for me, that was just that's called my childhood. But I was a child in the '80s in the U.S. I mean, it's so funny. I'm watching the most recent season of Stranger Things, where they kind of lean into the Satanic Panic angle, and
I haven't seen it yet.
That's not a spoiler. But it's just, because they're all full of pop culture anyways. But I keep watching this series ever since it came out. I'm like, I had that shirt. I had that lamp. Everybody had that couch. And that was my childhood. Right around, I mean, I think, it's like I watched that show. I'm like, I even pulled out my 3rd grade school photo. I'm like, look, it's my Stranger Things cast photo.
For me, the first Stranger Things, it was the music. It was the soundtrack. And I couldn't believe it when in successive episodes we had great scenes backed by, firstly, Atmosphere by Joy Division, and in the next episode, Nocturnal Me by Echo and the Bunnymen. Two absolutely brilliant records that I never thought I'd see on essentially an American TV show.
Oh yeah, the hits just keep rolling in on the series throughout the seasons. But yeah, it's kind of funny because I watched the show and I'm like, I remember being out until the street lamps came on. I remember, this is gonna be maybe a little too crazy, I remember going out into the park to hunt with my friends, to hunt down Satanists that we heard were in the neighborhood.
Oh, right.
We were a bunch of dumb kids. We thought we were tough. We were going to go get rid of the Satanists because we were a bunch of D&D players, and we were like, hey, these guys are making a bad name for us,
So you picked up sticks and
exactly. We were maybe 10 or 11 at the time, not yet prosecutable.
I certainly remember just being out on my bike until it got dark. Usually.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned picking up sticks. That was the same park where we used to LARP before LARPing was a thing. We'd go out there and play as our characters and run around in the woods and go on adventures and stuff like that. Make armor out of apple crates and stuff like that. So
one of my friends had some plastic swords and armor, which we used to hit each other with.
Yeah, we used actual sticks and hit each other.
The plastic stuff weren't enough. I just want to say hello to Adam, who's joined us. Adam, how's your other half? How's she doing? Is she all right?
Yeah.
Last time you mentioned that she was waiting for an operation. Hope it's all gone well. So glad you can join us again, Adam.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, right. We have a topic we can go back to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm horrible. My ADHD brain is not going to let us stay on topic, I have to guarantee you.
Well, we need Saxius because I have that as well. So.
See, we need you. We need some voice of reason.
It keeps us on topic. So, name another system you've got in your collection that you wish you'd played. You haven't played enough of. You haven't played.
I have Boot Hill, 3rd edition Boot Hill.
Right.
I've never played it. Cowboys are there's a soft spot for Cowboys in the back of my head, but Boot Hill's good, but it's not the systems that I have that I really, really wish I could have played. It's hard because, like I said, there was a time where we played everything. I have this weird benefit of having gone from high school to living with 4 or 5 of my recently, free from their parents gamer friends in a big house for a while in like my mid 20s. It's like there was the question was not are we gaming, it was what are we playing tonight. There were like 4 or 5 campaigns for different games going on anytime.
When I was that age, my gaming stuff was all stuck in my parents' garage. I was just go to the pub.
Well, that's where I lost a good chunk of mine. Is like when I moved out of that house and in with my future wife, I left a bunch of my stuff back there because it was just down the road. I mean, literally, my wife and I got an apartment like 3 blocks from the bachelor house, right? And I could never get back to get my stuff. And then later on, my friend lost the house, and so my stuff just went with the house.
Oh, that's a bit of a serious way to lose it.
Most of my Rifts books, most of my West End Games Star Wars books, they all went that way. None of my D&D stuff, but yeah. System-wise, I don't think there were actually a lot of RPGs that I didn't get to play. And there are games that I've played infrequently. There is one. Helios. It's a recent game, or Hellas, I think is what it's called, not Helios. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. I picked it up at a local gaming convention, local on the West Coast. Bought it from the creators. They were cool enough to sit down and run a demo game for me and my friends. And it was a science fiction game, but the whole concept was science fiction Greek myth. So, for example, your different. So, literally, they took for their section of space, they took a map of the Peloponnese and turned it into sectors of space and nebulas and stuff like that. So, like all the areas of space were an exact map of the Greek world, except just transposed into space sectors. But like the Myrmidons were a race of intelligent ant swarms that could form humanoid forms. The centaurs were actually these squid type guys who would build cybernetic frames for themselves and like ride in them. So they had like the horse body. There was a race of Amazon women. There was all these different Greek themes transformed into this really cool setting. The neat thing is that the rules were designed to where your play experience would necessarily go through 3 characters. And those characters would reflect your family's heroic lineage. You would start with one character and you would play him up to a point where you and the DM decided his tale had been told, and then you would play his descendant, whether that was a biological descendant or somebody he had mentored or somebody who had picked up his mantle, and that character would benefit from your previous character's career. And then that character would play to a particular finite position. And then you got to the high level play where that third character was that way. By the time you got to your third character, you're like, I am such and such, born of blah, 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 fostered by such and such. And you'd played all that. It was really a cool setting. But it was the formatting of the book. It was its worst enemy. It was a hardbound book with heavy gloss pages that was bound landscape.
Oh.
So big, wide book with heavy pages. So that whole wide landscape page length just hanging on the spine.
So it wouldn't sit well on the shelf. And
it eventually fell apart just under gravity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Later printings went to portrait, but
yeah, it makes sense.
But yeah, it was a great concept, and playing the game was really neat. Of course, I played it with the other game rule system that I want to play that I never is Hollow Earth Expedition. That was another one written by locals, like really locals, like they were 30 minutes from my house in my old town that I lived in. Also got to play with those guys at the same convention, but it was a game that was one of the first games I ever played that used special dice. Like, how like the modern day Star Wars games have the odd kind of mathematically calculated dice. They used D8s, but they had actually engineered several color-coded D8s that would produce the same successes rolled based on what colors you were rolling. So if you were supposed to be rolling 5 D8s, you could just roll one red one, and you generate the same number of successes. So, but it was a really cool, pulpy, hollow world, sort of a pulp adventure kind of thing. So it was a good one. But those are the two that I've never been able to actually play other than the demo games with their creators.
I mean, for me, there's one game I do want to play that I keep mentioning. That's Warhammer Fantasy Role Playing. I have never played it. I've heard so many good things about it. I've been told by so many people that it would suit me. Maybe I should just invest in the books and just end up running it myself. But I'd like to play in a game of it first.
I played 3 sessions of it.
Was it any good?
It was fun. I like, if I recall correctly, it's a percentile based system, which is always an appeal to me. But also I love it is the ultimate expression of the kind of adventure rat concept that D&D sort of tried to have back in the day. But I mean, you can start that game as a rat catcher or a beggar. And it was just fun. The Warhammer world is also incredibly well developed just over decades. And so there's a lot to use. It's just such a rich world. But it's also a rich world that's sort of grounded in historical themes. So it's really easy to draw from your historical knowledge in that setting. I mean, if you know anything about the Holy Roman Empire, you know the Empire.
Yeah, I mean that might be one of the reasons why people keep recommending it to me, because I do like that sort of style. Another one, one of my players has got Blades in the Dark and has extolled its virtues to me, but he's never put the time in to digest the rules and get a game of it going. It sounds interesting.
If you want the feel of it, but don't want to necessarily learn the system, there is Shadow of the Demon Lord.
Right.
Shadow of the Demon Lord was fans of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay who wanted to play that kind of game, but wanted to not deviate they wanted to use a familiar system. So it is a gritty, dark, lose your leg to an infection kind of a world, using the fifth edition spine, the core of 5th edition as a mechanic. There's also a new one that's come out that's an OSR version called Warlock. Fantastic. Was it? Can't remember. Questing Beast did a blurb on it recently. It's called Warlock, and it combines OSR style design and mechanics with that kind of world. So in fact, he very much says that if you wanted to play in the Warhammer, or maybe it was Professor Dungeon Master, either way, Warlock is what it's called. If you wanted to play Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay but didn't want to dive into that system, it's a perfect fit too. So
I mean, I quite like percentage-based systems. Like, obviously, I'm a fan of Call of Cthulhu, which is a very simple percentage-based system.
Yeah.
And if one thing I will, if I get to my 1,000 subscribers, I might well pay for an upgrade to Roll20, so I've got a bit of storage space on there. And if that happens, then I can certainly get a campaign of that underway, because one thing that is holding me back is the fact that I want to run it over Roll20, but I don't have the storage space on a free account at the moment.
Yeah, I remember you saying that, with the computerized die rollers and stuff, that it's actually a very playable game.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I remember the old ICE systems being just so cumbersome, whether it was Space Hero or not Space Hero, but was it Space Hero? Because they had a space one and a cyberpunk one even, and yeah, it was Space Master. Yeah, I think it's Space Master and all of that. Yeah, but
yeah, I mean, I've run Middle Earth a number of times at the table, and every time we've really got into it, either the characters have died, or I've often come away from sessions with my head throbbing, because my players got into gaming coming through systems like 5th edition, and we were playing AD&D, where all the numbers are quite small, and obviously 5th edition run at low levels plays very quickly. I run AD&D very quickly. I don't stop and worry about odd little modifiers or the minutiae of certain rules. I just go with whatever seems to work at the time. My main aim is to keep things flowing, and in order to do that when running with running Middle Earth, it became quite difficult, because if you're in a combat, when you make an attack, you have an offensive bonus, and say your character's got offensive bonus of 55, you can choose how much of that you want to put on offense and how much you want to put on defense. So you say, I'll use 35 points in attack, and I'll use 20 points to defend, to parry with. So and if you've moved a certain distance towards your enemy, or if you're on higher ground, or your enemy is stunned, or you're carrying a bit of a wound, or you've taken so much damage, these are all modifiers. And in D&D, modifiers tend to be +1 or -1 or +2 or -2. These are +20, +25, -15. And it's trying to get something to run very smoothly when you roll the dice. It's +35 minus the opposition's defensive bonus, which is 25. So you're now at +10. But you're wounded, so now you're at -10. But you're on higher ground, so now you're at +5. And then you roll the percentage dice and you add that modifier to it.
I wonder how it would run using the 7th edition Call of Cthulhu bonus and penalty dice instead.
It probably would run a lot more smoothly.
Yeah, because Star Frontiers, the game I mentioned earlier, I mean, you know it, but it's percentile, and it's not an elegant percentile system either. It's pretty ham-fisted. It's like you have a percentage and you either succeed or fail, right? I think could also benefit from some of the Chaosium treatment. That bonus and penalty die rule really adds a lot to 7th edition, and not to mention doing away with the resolution table from Chaosium is useful, where they have, because now they have that half and 5% whatever. So yeah, it was something like Rolemaster, where you're not just +1 and +2, you're dealing with a wider span of modifiers as far as just the numeric value can get to be a bit of a jumble. That's a lot of math on the fly.
I mean, it's not hard calculations. It's just the number of them, and they're all almost always two-digit numbers.
And it's not overly linear either.
No.
It's because you could be up 10, down 5, up another 10, down 15.
Yeah. Yeah. But the actual results you get in combat are good. So when you run it through Roll20, it does those. It just says how much of your offensive bonus are you using. Click, and you roll the dice, and it, bing. There's your result.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, on a bit of a tangent. I mean, we're already seeing it to a degree. If more games were written with computers in mind, because of the things you can do with them. I know there's if you've ever played the Mansions of Madness board game for Call of Cthulhu, it's one of the Fantasy Flight Games ones, I think.
I've seen it being set up. I was at a convention and I sat at the table with it being set up, and then I had to go.
So I have played that game before they released their app and after they released their app. It is much more entertaining after the app was released. Before they released the app for it, one player pretty much had to, you almost had to do it like, kind of remember when you would play Monopoly and one player had to be the banker?
Yeah.
One player would have to dedicate himself to facilitating all of the card and counter flips and stuff for the scenarios in Mansions of Madness. But now the app does it all based on your selections. And what's really neat is the puzzles that the game would have in it, because the game had actual physical puzzles that you would have to solve, which meant that a player would have to pull out, the guy would have to pull out all the pieces and get them on the table. And then you'd have to, now the app pulls them up on a screen and you get to slide them around on the screen in digital format. And it's a joy to play with the app. You don't lose any of the experience of playing it. But like you're talking about with Rollmaster here, physically without the app, it was kind of cumbersome and a little bit weighty, maybe a little bit too much to really be enjoyable. And one person was definitely doing more than their fair share in that game. And I feel like the DM in Rollmaster or the GM in Rollmaster is probably doing so much work.
Yeah, and I get my enjoyment from winning games from describing the scene and playing the parts of the NPCs. And when the system does have put so much mathematical pressure on you, it makes that harder.
Oh yeah, I think games are always better when people can everybody can keep their mind on the action. We talked about with 5th edition, I think the players are losing a lot of the fun by having to focus so much on their character sheet. Or at the flip side of that is they're putting a lot of time into their character that they never get out of. They never actually get the full oomph out of their character because there's so much to it. That in play, referring back to it is just really difficult. It's like trying to play old school miniatures war games with charts and tables and references and stuff. And you're just like, how did I play that back in the day?
We had so much more time, didn't we? That was
Yeah, I read somewhere, and I think I've mentioned this before, the geeks back in the day really had to be the geeks and the nerds because nobody else could decipher D&D because it was so poorly written. You really had to commit to it.
And we all came up with our own versions of it.
My buddy and I sat down with the old PHB, the original AD&D PHB and 1st edition, and we were flipping through. I'm like, do you ever remember playing with this rule? He's like, I didn't even know that rule existed.
Yes. Yeah, it can be said. I mean, you just open up the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide and read it for half an hour, and I can guarantee you'll find 3 or 4 snippets that you've completely forgotten about.
Well, what I find amusing is all the things that we were finding that are new and revolutionary in 5th edition. And I'm like, they had that back then, just nobody knew.
Yeah, it was tucked away in a bit of Gygaxian verbosity.
I remember hearing somewhere that the concept of advantage disadvantage goes all the way back to OD&D at Gary's tables or something that, or somebody's table back in the day. That it's not new.
I knew it wasn't new, but
it's such an elegant solution. I mean, just roll another die and take the higher of the two. It takes out a lot of those little middling, like you were talking about, the little 5-10%, or +1, +2s. I mean, it's effectively a +5, but
on average, yes,
it
works out average as a +5. Yeah.
But I don't know. it's funny. It's actually hard for me to think of rule systems and supplements and stuff that I haven't been able to play. Now that I think about it, I thought there were more of them. A lot of them are miniatures games too, though, so that's not exactly the purview of this channel.
Well, it might be in the future. We should. I have got tons and tons of miniatures. Maybe I'll do some streams where I sit and paint, but those streams will take forever because I'm very slow at painting.
This is the funny thing. I'm a miniatures gamer, but I hate painting miniatures.
I quite enjoy. At least I did before my eyesight started playing up. And for me to paint now, I have to have my glasses and I have to have a head magnifier and a torch on the magnifier to illuminate it enough for me to focus.
Yeah, I've gone to that point where my bifocals have to be redone because my whole vision is what the secondary lens was now.
Yeah.
But I back when I played Warhammer, because I haven't played Warhammer since like 3rd edition of 40K, I had a huge army, and it was pretty much pure gray the whole time I had it. So,
there's one of mine anyway. That's one of my paint jobs.
That's cool.
It's quite a pretty one.
Little statues are always useful.
There's a troll there as well. There's a troll. Just Reaper bones.
Yeah, I paint to a tabletop standard. I'm never looking for championship stuff. Base colors, quick wash and a quick dry brush, and I'm good. So
that statue isn't much more than that. There's only about 4 or 5 colors on that in total.
Yeah.
Just done with the shading and stuff. One of the guys I've played with in recent years is a very, very accomplished painter. He's got a blog on all creating stuff. I have mentioned it before. He's the one who created my Ye Old Geek logo. Crooked Staff. If you like making things, he's got a whole YouTube channel about making cheap terrain and all that sort of stuff.
I love junk building. I left so much crap back in Washington when we moved because I just couldn't justify moving totes full of old chip containers and printer cartridges and takeout containers. I'm like, it's expensive to move. It costs like $5,000 just to get my stuff to St. Louis.
Right.
And then we drove a van full here too, right as gas prices were climbing. But and so we had to triage our stuff big time. So, but yeah.
What sort of distance did you have? I mean,
3,000 miles.
Yeah, no wonder. That's that's the complete length of the British Isles.
Is it 3,000?
4 times.
I'm trying to remember. It took us 4 days driving 12 hours a day.
I couldn't imagine it.
And a snowstorm in the middle of it.
I mean, yeah, it's about 3 or 4 times the distance from the tip of the very southwest of Britain up to the very northeast.
Oh yeah,
So,
I know that there are
roads.
many European countries that'll fit in a single U.S. state. So
Yeah.
That's also the cool thing. I've always thought is like it must be neat. Like I mentioned before in a previous, I had a supervisor who was from Birmingham over there, right? And he's like, on the weekend, my buddies and I would just drive to France. Because he's young enough. He's like, we just take our car, get it across the water, drive from France, then drive to Germany. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I could drive all day and get to another state, but I'm still in America, and the culture is, even the local microculture in America hasn't changed enough.
Whereas here in Britain, we can drive 20 miles down the road and the accents completely change.
That has always been humorous to me. But no, I'm in a very different place now because I've gone from the kind of stuck-up, snobby Northwest to the Midwest, where everybody wants to say hi and get in your business.
It's more friendly.
I don't like friendly. There's something that I can never feel a secret. I hate people, but
Isn't that part of being a gamer? Isn't that why
yeah, that's
we spend our time on the internet talking about games?
you know. But I think gaming wise, it's kind of interesting. I find myself. I used to try to buy everything that I ran into. I had more disposable income, of course, back then, but also had more time. And I find myself just nowadays, I just feel overwhelmed by everything that comes out. It's like every time I'm looking at the internet, there's 5 Kickstarters I'd love to back. I can only imagine what joys of gaming I have missed simply for lack of time and funds.
Yes, long gone are the days when you were limited to one shop in town and whatever they chose to put on their shelves.
And whatever one game came out in 3 years.
Yeah. It's, there's a new D&D book out. Oh!
Or you'd run into a new system and I remember when Vampire came out. I mean, that was such a game changer. I mean, literally. But it was suddenly you had people. It was sort of what we're having now with 5th edition. Suddenly people who never played games were playing games. Like goth girls and cool guys with long wispy hair who smoked cloves were playing games. And then looking down their nose at you because you played D&D still. But
a very different game. At least there's not. I don't think there's no problem in there being games out there for everybody.
No, not at all. But I do remember running into the snobbery. Oh, you still play D&D? I'm like, yes, I do.
Yeah.
It's.
I remember at university about 1990. We had a D&D game in our house, and one of the housemates started dancing around the room, going. He came into the room and he was like, "Oh, you're all playing goblins and pixies," and started dancing around, putting on a silly voice. That's about all I had to put up with.
Yeah, I always scored it as a win though, because back when we were playing D&D and it was a weird kind of group because I started playing when I was in 3rd grade, and the guy I started playing with was in 5th grade, and his brother was in 7th grade. And so we just kind of had these 3 different school levels that kind of moved up through the years. But yeah, here's his older brother, Mr. Jock football player, wanted to play D&D. We always thought that was a win. We have the football player playing D&D. But even when I got back into high school, when I eventually got into high school, I was running games, and it was always kind of a pleasant surprise when you'd be sitting there huddled in your corner in the library playing whatever game you were playing, like Star Wars or whatever, right? Because we couldn't play D&D in that school because it was satanic and they would take your stuff. One day this, not just one jock, but a cluster of sporty jock guys wander by, and they're like, "What are you doing?" We're like, "We're playing Star Wars, the role-playing game." And they're like, "There's a game for that? Oh, that's so cool. Can we play?" I'm like, Yes, you can. Sit down, gentlemen.
The last, before I put all my stuff away, the last game of D&D I ran when I was at university was entire. I used to play for the Leeds University American football team, and all the players there in that game were members of the team. And that was the last game I ran before I started gaming again in 2012.
That's cool.
And that surprised me. It surprised me when a couple of them said, we'd all just graduated. It was the last few weeks of university. The team was breaking up. We'd all been as part of the same team together for a long time. And we'd all run out of money, and I said to a couple of them who I knew were gamers, I'll run a game of it. And everything. Oh yeah, and then a few of them heard and went, "Oh, can we come along? Oh, can we come along?" And there was about 7 or 8 of us crammed into my my room in our house, and we had a game of it, and it was great fun. Great fun.
Yeah, I always find it funny just how people actually, once they realize what gaming is, actually get into it. It's kind of cool. You know, it's like I think there's a lot of people have these weird misconceptions about what it is. I mean, obviously things have changed over the years. You know, you've got high-priced lawyers playing Xbox. You know? But you know, it's so funny because I also hear a lot of this dialogue about inclusion and exclusion and stuff like that. And I know, like for our gaming group, we would have loved to have more people come up to our table and ask to play, or our groups, you know. And anytime anybody new moved into the neighborhood and found out that we were playing what we were playing, if they asked to play, we're like, all right, here's your character sheet.
Yes.
I've got it held behind my back the minute you come in the door. I'm just hoping you ask, right?
I've said it before in a few of my videos. We didn't care. It didn't matter who you were. Just
I mean, I'm sure people have had bad experiences, and I'm not denying that they happen. I've seen them happen. I've talked to people who've had them happen. Have things happen, but bad things happen in gaming groups. I've had a gun pulled on me in a game store before.
Bad things happen, and bad people exist in all parts of life. It's a simple fact.
Yeah, but yeah, I always try to be the best I can when it comes to my groups. I don't care who you are, as long as you're not a horrible person, I'll play games with you.
Yeah, I have just kept someone out of my channel, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Somebody took offence to something I said in my video, and I worked out very quickly that he was trolling me.
Yeah.
And I just thought I can't be bothered. Click, gone.
Yeah, it's a rough world. I know. I think I've mentioned it in a couple of streams. I've got aspirations of trying to write for publication, and I've been told that I have the chops for it. I just don't necessarily have the discipline for it, but I have the writing skills and style. But there are a few things I've wanted to write that aren't particularly hot spots, but I've decided not to pursue them because I just don't want the trouble that they would bring. Just because I think I mentioned it. There's I would love to write a campaign setting that leans into Native American culture and kind of the Pacific Northwest environment. But that's a can of worms I don't want to open. So I'll run that at my table, but I doubt I'd ever do it for a publication.
There's the first campaign I wrote for 5th edition. I've run two groups through it, and I've started writing it up, but I keep starting and stopping. And the theme at the start is that the starting town. I don't know whether you know what's going on in the Pitcairn Islands in the Pacific, where the gene pool is so small. There are problems in the community.
I had not heard about that.
They are mostly descended. They're pretty much all descended from the crew of the Bounty Mutineers.
Oh wow!
So they've got a very small gene pool, and I basically created a village based on that idea. So a lot of the people in the town have got breeding related deformities.
Yeah, you're going to have an inbred culture, so.
Exactly. But I do wonder quite how far to push that in creating that town, because people are going to go, whoa.
Well, and like for example, with my setting, it's like, so the Pacific Northwest is a wonder, and when I say that, I mean like anything from Oregon all the way up through Alaska, and into Canada, like the Yukon, is a very interesting environment that presents some aspects that conventional fantasy settings don't. There's also a rich native culture throughout that area, and their folklore and their monsters and stuff like that are just very rarely tapped into on a deep level. You might get the monsters, like Pathfinder, for example, has published every monster that appears in any culture anywhere in all of its 8 million monster books. But I would love, it's my love of those cultures that makes me want to write the thing. But it's also the fact that I'm not of those cultures and would, really draw a lot of fire. Also, the biggest thing is, how do you make it in an adventuring environment without necessarily having to have at least some baseline colonialism in there?
Yeah, and I find this one of the reasons why I find those sort of attitudes that you have to be part of the culture and whatever odd. Back in the 90s, I had dreadlocks, and I lived in a.
My wife has had dreadlocks before. Yeah.
And I lived in an area that was mostly black at that time, and I got no backlash whatsoever. In fact, I mean, I was a student in that area, and students often, in a lot of student areas in Britain, there's often a bit of clash between students and locals. And I got no issues whatsoever from having dreadlocks. And if anything, the fact that I had a hairstyle that the people in the area tended to wear themselves made our lives easier as students. I wasn't looked on as being a student, an outsider in the area. It was weird.
I had a fun moment. I have a mohawk, right? And I've had a mohawk forever. And I used to go clean shaven with no beard. And I'm on an elevator in Seattle where we have a decent Native American population. It's the home of the Salish people. And I was on an elevator with a Native American lady, and she looks at me. She's like, "Are you one of the people?" And I'm like, because my mohawk was dyed like really dark jet black at the time, right? And I'm like, "Oh no, sorry. Yes, I realize I got the scalp lock, but no, I'm just a punk." It's like, so I mean, I was kind of flattered. I mean, do I have the kind of features and stuff that says Native American? Sure. But no, I was just a punk. But it's a weird time. I think I could probably write the thing and publish it in the OSR and not catch as much flack. If I was to try and circulate it in the 5th edition, community, probably is where I draw most of my fire.
Yeah.
But it's because that's the big target in the room. I mean, it's the mainstream.
I mean, yeah, if I converted that campaign I wrote for 5th edition to an OSR system, Osric, for example, it would probably have no issues whatsoever. I'd have to rebalance the way it progresses in places because obviously advancement is slower. But apart from that, yeah, I can see that as being But as you said, I'm just utterly disorganized. I start and I stop. And
Same. I've decided that if I'm ever going to go ahead and produce anything professionally, I'm going to need a partner, somebody who can keep me on task. Now that I live in the same area with my brother, who is actually a project manager, maybe I can get something done.
I helped build a rally car a few years ago, and it hadn't been for the fact my brother was the main mechanic there. I'd never done that. I couldn't organize it to save my life.
Yeah, I have one published writing credit to my name, and it's a thing on DriveThru, and that's for another company. But I do have a miniature that appeared in a set of rules. I converted up a zombie elephant, and it appears in a set of zombie rules.
I appear as a scout in a Football Manager computer game because I proofread the manual.
That's cool.
Woo. These
You know,
claims to anyway.
I have helped a lot of people work on their projects, so I've kind of come to this. Maybe I'm just out there to help other people achieve their dreams.
Yeah. Yes.
I think we're losing
Adam-
a lot of folks.
Hmm?
Oh, some folks have been saying goodnight.
Yeah, I've been saying good night to them. Adam's still chatting. Adam says here, yeah, he was a jock football player who went to school on a football scholarship and played AD&D.
There you go.
Stuff. I mean, yeah, I don't fit. I guess as I said, I played American football, not to a particularly good level, but I played. I have a black belt. I did 7 years in motorsport as a rally driver, and I captained a cricket team for 16 years. So I was fairly sporty. Still am.
I was not. I have the coordination of an intoxicated giraffe, so no, I am not.
I'm not saying I'm coordinated. I'm not very coordinated. I'm just an aggressive little sod in a sporting environment.
My only claim to fame in sports was getting best defensive player on a team one year, and that's just because I was really good at getting in the way of people. So, it's just,
Did your job?
But yeah. Oh, let's see what we got here.
Yes, it looks like chat have been rambling in the same way that we have.
Well, we're kind of far afield at this point, so yeah.
Yeah, there's something else I've not used too. There you go. Something else I spent money on I've never used. I have no idea whether it's any good or not. It's Forgotten Realms.
Oh, the Undermountain campaign?
Yeah. I thought I'd plunder it for stuff and never got around to it.
Mega dungeons are daunting.
They are, yes.
I'm kind of enamored with the idea of them, but I don't think I would be able to, as a GM, I don't think I would have the stick-to-itiveness to actually run one. I mean, I think I would get bored before my players would. So.
I did, in one of my campaigns, I did sort of create a mega dungeon bit by bit by bit. Very sort of episodic. And my players were going deeper and deeper, and I was creating one level or one side bit, and for each session, bit by bit by bit. But I think they all get a bit much after a while, and it's hard to keep them to feel cohesive.
I'm really intrigued by Barrow Maze.
I've played a bit of it.
I think as far as the setup for a mega dungeon, that appeals to me, where you have like lots of small dungeons that can feed into the mega dungeon is an appealing take.
I wish I'd got my copy of Merp Moria available, because that's possibly the biggest mega dungeon imaginable. But I haven't got it to hand. It's not up on my shelf. It's out of reach.
I know my brother and I were actually talking about trying to write one, or actually writing up this concept of the dungeon, like in caps, as an actual demi-plane unto itself. So creating a mega dungeon that is itself a demi-plane, so where it logically, this sounds weird, it logically fits the complete wackiness that Gygax describes that your dungeon should be in the original concept of the dungeon. That sort of otherworldly fantasy underground that's ever changing, ever expanding, and endless was kind of his original concept. We're like, how could we write that in a way that would fit into a game world and actually have some internal logic? So you have this demi-plane that's a dungeon, and it touches into the material plane at various points, and those are different dungeon entrances. And so
Wasn't his castle Greyhawk something like that?
I'm not familiar enough with it, but probably. At least I'm sure it's not an original idea, but it's just that we were kind of leaning into that idea. But also in a campaign setting, could it be used as a form of fast travel, but dangerous fast travel? Because you dip down into the dungeon and you come out another dungeon entrance, and suddenly you're a continent away. But because you went through this demi-plane.
Yeah, you've had to fight your way through a horde of bugbears to get there.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, it explains why the dungeon might change between visits and how rooms could, say, revolve or twist and change without having to have any actual mechanism to do so. I mean, they could have a mechanism because it's a weird, wacky parallel dimension. Like the demi-planes, when you got the demi-plane of dread and stuff like that, in the concept of the game, I guess, the whole idea of little microplanes, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, mega dungeons are hard for me to get my head around.
I mean, that idea, it's one of those sort of colourful, wonderful ideas that buzz around your head, but when it actually comes down to putting it down on paper.
Yeah, I mean, how do you write it? How do you write it and not have it just be another mega dungeon?
And how do you write it to be understandable?
Yeah.
Playable.
We were talking about actually doing it as a zine, to where each zine was kind of featuring sort of a themed core part of the dungeon, and then the players and the DMs could just kind of piece it together as they wanted. But who knows if it'll ever happen? Because as gamers, we have 8 million ideas, and they all wilt on the bush.
Do you find that most of your ideas tend to come to you as you're dozing off to sleep, and you think, I should make a note of that for the morning, and then they're gone when you wake up?
My ideas come to me all day, every day, and constantly, and sometimes I doubt my sanity because of them.
When you're stuck in, I tend to find when I'm stuck in traffic, or when I'm dozing off to sleep, or when I'm very bored.
It's for me, it's weird. I get adventure ideas and stuff. For example, somebody could mispronounce a word, and next thing you know, I've got this whole tangent for a example. Somebody mispronounced wyvern once and pronounced it as wolvern, right? And next thing you know, my campaign world has smaller pack hunting wyverns in it. Because we have wolverines, right? My brain just like, why not, right? And it's having played for many years with a bunch of also very ADHD people. It's so funny the stuff that comes up. We had a Minotaur character in one board game. I mean, there's not even any actual role play to the board game, but through the course of playing this board game, this mythos was created of this Minotaur that he wasn't actually a Minotaur. He was just a regular cow with a horned helmet stuck on his head. And all these stories had been built up about the accomplishments that he had managed, and kind of very Gru the Wanderer style, and he slew the bandit king because he actually got stung by a bee and just charged him and ran him over, right? But everybody tells the story of this big Minotaur, but it's actually just a cow with a horned helmet stuck to his head. And of course that's ironic because he's a cow, so he's got horns anyways. But it's like, it was like, that's where my brain goes, man. It's just nuts. And that's all day, to the point where my wife gets annoyed at me sometimes, because we'll be watching something on TV and I'm like, that would make a cool adventure. She's like, do you not think of anything else?
No, why?
It's like, I can't turn it off. Help me.
I was sat at work today, and I was thinking about how to role play my Satyr on Monday. And I came up with all manner of little ideas, little things to say, little traits, little characteristics, little reactions to things. And I so wish I'd written them all down because I've completely forgotten them all.
Yeah. So one thing that I often find myself doing, and I don't know if you ever do this, I will openly, like when I'm driving or I'm the only one in the house, I'll go through like character dialogue like out loud. And I'm like, or I'll practice how my characters, because I don't get to play very often, but when I do, I really lean into them. Like how my character would respond or how my character would react to something, and it's just a weird process. It's like method acting, but it's just the weirdest thing. I for Call of Cthulhu, I love just eating up like unsolved weird crime, weird mystery stories, and then like turning them into Call of Cthulhu. Yeah, like how can I turn this into a Cthulhu adventure? And I was starting to say earlier, I'm like back to Call of Cthulhu. I found that it's such a great game because anything can be turned into an adventure for that. When I got my players into the game for the very first time, the whole game was them being invited to a mutual friend's house, new cabin up in the mountains to celebrate Christmas and the New Year with him. And things went wrong. And it turns out one of the gifts that was given, because they're all a bunch of high-level intellectual kind of people, was an actual artifact and was able to stop the big bad in the end. But it was never telegraphed like that. You had a statue of Yig. It was just a statue of Yig. Who knew that it was the thing that you were going to need to beat the mummified snake person that was in the old ancient Native American mound in the mountains, right?
And they had it all along.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of but it all started with Christmas in a Cabin, which is a fond memory I have from my childhood. One year, my brother and I have different fathers, and so his father's parents came in and took all of us up into the mountains, and we had Christmas in a cabin in the mountains. It was magical. To this day, I hope to be able to do it again for my kids. But it also made a really good Call of Cthulhu adventure.
I have a map I'm going to be using in a game in the non-too-distant future, which is entirely based on the campsite we stayed at last summer.
That's cool.
I just it's turned into a gnome village, in a little dell surrounded by like bubbling streams, and because it's an idyllic campsite up in Snowdonia in Wales, and I was just sat in the tent thinking this campsite would make a great D&D map. A great D&D map. So I just sat there one afternoon while we were out camping and just doodled it out, and I've got my folder ready to use at some point.
I know in the past I've used like for Gamma World real life maps, like mall maps and stuff like that. It's so funny because I some of my earlier jobs were as security guards, right? I've been a mall cop. I've been in-house security for a real estate company. And I always found it funny because one of the questions I always ask you on those security clearance kind of things is like, have you ever thought about or contemplated crime or committing a crime? I'm like, well, if I'm good at my job, I have. Right? And I worked with a guy at the mall, one of the bosses, and he calls me one night. He's like, all right, I want you to meet me out in front of your house dressed all in black. I'm like, what are we doing, Doug? Right? And he's like, we're breaking into the mall, the one that we guard at, right? I'm like, and he was the head of security there. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, we're gonna troubleshoot the night shift, you and I, and we're gonna go around the mall tonight, and we're gonna try and see if we can sneak past them and get into the mall. And I'm like, thinking the whole time, I'm like, this is kind of like LARPing. I got to find my way into the dungeon. There's hallways. The janitorial staff are monsters. Yeah, you can't get spotted. There are underground tunnels under the mall.
Roll D6 for surprise.
Exactly. It's like yeah, it was crazy times, but yeah, it's like real life experience, feeding
And
into gaming.
and the thing is, if you ever asked a question, have you ever thought of, and you've got ADHD, the chances are yes.
The fact that this question is on this test makes it a yes, because now I am. If I wasn't before, I am now.
It just sends your brain off in a tangent.
Exactly, which is why we're where we're at and not talking about games we've never played.
Yeah,
It's got to be getting
precisely.
pretty late for you over there.
It is, yes. It's 20 to midnight.
Ooh, yikes!
So, yeah, I probably gonna have to take that prod to wrap it up in a bit.
Oh no,
See.
not a problem at all.
It's and well, chat's gone quiet as well. I think.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of pointing out earlier, is that we aren't getting a lot of chatter on the chat, and I am kind of out of things on topic to talk about. So
Yeah. Well, we've once again we've managed to stay on topic for about an hour, which is fine.
this is one of those topics I think that would have gone better if we could have maintained more people speaking, because then it would have been spread around a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Doof popped in for a couple of minutes just to chat about Earth Dawn, which is something I
Earth Dawn
have.
is weird. I remember trying to get into it. It's like Fallout, but with fantasy.
Now, Fallout.
So, as far as I understand, in Earth Dawn, like there was a big cataclysm, and everybody like hunkered down into these dungeons to escape the cataclysm, and now they're coming out.
Yeah. In my gaming group, there's a couple of us who DM, and one of the guys, he was running a Fallout. He got the Fallout RPG, and everybody else in the gaming group got really. I did enjoy playing it. I certainly enjoyed the first few sessions, but when the game sort of went into areas that were really referring to the video game, I got a bit lost because I've never played it. So a lot of it was missed on me. The first few sessions were great because we were in a prison and we were trying to break out of a prison, which is quite generic. But that was good. So Fallout's a bit of an odd one for me. But so how does Earth Dawn compare with Fallout? Did you say?
Just in the basic concept of a big cataclysm, and then people kind of crawling out of seclusion and getting back to the world after that's formed after they went into the vaults. But I have not. I only have a passing knowledge about Earth Dawn. So,
well, I mean that particular DM, he ran. You say you've got Boot Hill and not played it. He ran Savage Worlds Deadlands, and I rather like that because I quite like Wild West history, despite the fact that it never happened here. It happened thousands of miles away. I find that that whole part of American history very interesting, and Savage Worlds Deadlands was great fun. I enjoyed that.
Deadlands is one of those. There's a game actually. I had Deadlands and I never played it. It's because I like the Wild West and I like American folklore because there's some crazy stuff there. It was one that appealed to me. Also, I liked the fact that spellcasters used actual card hands to cast their spells. The hucksters. That was kind of neat.
I played one of those characters. That was my character.
Yeah. It's
Maple Leaf Mick. His name was named after the fact that he wrapped his chewing tobacco up in maple leaves to give them flavor, and he had a curse, a drawback that I took, that he didn't know that he was suffering from throat cancer. But it was, it was, I don't know. In that, you have to roll at the start of every session to see if your drawback has got worse. So it was quite a dark character to play, to be honest. He was never without his rolling tobacco. Was often soaked his rolling tobacco in whiskey to numb the pain. And he was quite a dark individual.
Yeah, the most recent character I've managed to get to play was in a 5th edition campaign that my brother was running, and I came into it well after the campaign had started. And I ended up playing a human. It was 5th edition, like I said, so I made a Battle Master, which is really great class. Personally, I think Battle Master should just replace Base Fighter. But fun class, but I was sort of this European swordsman type of character. Think of like late medieval, early Renaissance kind of, Spanish or Italian, swordsman kind of guy, half armored, sword and shield. And I played him up. He was from a noble family, but he was the youngest of all the sons, so he wasn't going to inherit anything. But he did, and I set out. I've had this personal crusade to never write a character with a tragic backstory ever again, because it's such a cliche. So I like this character who's like, I am one of 3 brothers. I'm the youngest brother, or youngest of the 3. I have a sister. My mother and my father are both alive. My grandfather's alive, and he adores me. They sent me to the best sword school, but I'm not going to ever inherit anything. So I'm out in the world to make a name and some fame and a fortune of my own. And like that was his character. He wasn't going to be this sad, sorry sod. My parents were all eaten by ogres. And then I got to make a rogue character once, and like my rogue, his backstory was he was one of like 14 kids, and he realized that he could support his family by stealing, and then he got in with the local Goblin Thieves Guild in the city, and they realized, hey, we got this human kid. He could be the face man on all our operations because he's just a human kid. Nobody's going to recognize him, right? And so he got in good with them. So now he's a thief adventuring because he knows he can make a living on it.
Almost like Oliver Twist.
Kind of, yeah. It's like and I think it's funny. I think there's so many people think that there's reasons they do it. Like they're either afraid that the DM's going to use their character's background against them, or they just don't want to bother, or they think it's cool.
I'm not a big fan of backstories. I mean, I would say General Nut has just spoiled the whole concept. But I don't know how maple leaves taste. I'm not from Canada.
Well, and the whole thing about it is, I mean, firstly, it doesn't matter. Your character thought that they had that added something to it. I mean, tobacco leaves don't taste all that great either, to be honest.
No. And I think it's the fact that he soaked the tobacco in the whiskey. It's more important. Yeah. I enjoyed playing him. He died a heroic death and then came back, because in Deadlands you can do that.
Dying and then coming back.
Yeah, he is now undead.
Yeah, I didn't get far enough in the game to realize that, so because I never got to play it, so I've literally not gotten anywhere in that game. But
it was sort of the almost the tragic heroic ending when he realized I'd failed my role on, so he was starting to get very ill. So right at the big finale, I had him basically march into the enemy base and cause all the explosives that they got in there to go up, taking him with it. And none of the players knew I was going to do that. My DM knew I was going to do it, but none of the players knew. It was a big shock. Oh, he's giving it life.
Here's a question for you: Is there a newer game that you would want to play, but you either don't think that you are going to find anybody to play it, or you don't have anybody to play it with?
a newer game.
Like, I mean, have you picked up anything recently that looks cool that you really want to play, but you're like having a hard? For me, that's the Alien RPG. I have the Alien RPG and I absolutely adore it. It's like one of the best written for a specific genre story sets of rules that's just so good. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how often you get a chance to pick up games or anything, but
I haven't bought any new games for a while. I've bought newer versions of games, for example, 7th edition Call of Cthulhu.
yeah.
But I haven't bought any new games for a while because I'm terrible at learning new games. I learn by playing.
Yeah.
I won't buy a rule book just on a whim. I'll play a few sessions of something and as a player before I buy a rule book, so that I've got an idea of how it runs before I even start reading.
Yeah, for me these days, it comes down to I will watch live plays online and stuff to see if before I pick them up, because for me that's sort of how I will how I learn the game, without having to actually pick it up. But Alien looked really good, and so it's like one of those games. But it's the problem with that one is it's not a game that you can just sit there and say, let's play this game, and it has a certain generic taste or feel to it. It's the Alien universe, and everybody knows that every human being in an Alien movie dies. So you're instantly inviting everybody. Hey, how would you like? Would you like to play a game where your character is intended to die? I do like the fact that that game has 2 modes of play, which is really cool. It has the cinematic version, which is here is your pre-gen. You are intended to you are basically disposable, but you can play your character at full bore because it's not your continuing campaign character, so people will play it honestly and full tilt, right? And that's like one and done, like a movie. And then they have their campaign mode where it's just like any other game, but in such a lethal universe, I'm pretty sure this game is more deadly than people like to say Call of Cthulhu is. So, but,
I mean, say with Call of Cthulhu, I mentioned it before that. I mean, if you're playing a Call of Cthulhu one shot, I can guarantee you it'll be I've got a number of scenarios up there where if they're played as a one shot, the body count will be excessive.
Yeah, I can get behind that. And that's exactly sort of how they've gone with the Alien RPG. If you're playing cinematic, it's not intended to be anything other than a one shot. So yes, it's going to play more lethal. It's not going to be because also just people will play their characters, I think, more risky when there's not a campaign on the line too.
Of course they will.
Yeah. You can be just as attached or just as into it, but yeah, Call of Cthulhu for us, like I said, we've only had 2 characters pulled out of the game. One sacrificed himself, and one was my wife wanting to change characters. We've had other characters leave because the player left, but their character technically still lives down the block. He's just an NPC now.
When I ran the prequel to Horror on the Orient Express, the Blood Red Fez, one character survived unscathed in the entire party.
That's cool. I've had one character hospitalized mid-game. He lived, but they actually he was in the hospital for like 2 days in-game, and he didn't mind. And then the players actually ended up having to rescue him from the hospital when the bad guys came after him in the hospital. So here he is spending the whole rest of that adventure with unresolved knife wounds in his chest. I mean, he literally watched a guy appear from within a passerby. It was a weird sort of fleshy teleport where the the passerby walks up to him like a regular innocent person, their body splits and the cultist comes out of him and stabs him in the chest.
Yes.
Body horror, your friend. But stabs him in the chest, like flat out. And he's like, that sucked. I mean, he did manage to get his shotgun shot off and blew the cultist to Kingdom Come too. But that he had a massive knife wound for a good chunk of the game. But it added to the drama because the rest of the players, they weren't going to let him die. And they but they were hampered by him. So it was a matter of finding, coming up with weird, cool, creative ways, kind of like in old school D&D games too. Like when your, wizard's down to 1 hit point, and you're like, what are you going to do to keep him alive, right?
How do we get out of this? No, the last Call of Cthulhu campaign that I ran online of any that came to an abrupt end, the characters survived 2 or 3 scenarios, but the third scenario was just one step too far, and it wasn't a particularly deadly scenario. It's just the way the players handled it. It just went completely wrong. And I think one character survived by jumping out of a upper story window and running away with a broken leg. That was it. That was it. But no, when I ran, as I said, when I ran the full Horror on the Orient Express campaign, they got through London, Paris, Lausanne. They got through, was it Milan next? And they were just arrived at Venice before COVID hit, and all the characters were still alive. And if you know that campaign, that's quite a meaty section they've got through.
I hear it's a pretty brutal campaign. I've never even looked into it just because of the weight of the work that goes into running it.
Yeah, it is. At least it's episodic, so you can work from it. You have to probably read about 100 pages of background material to start with, but then each episode is about 20 pages.
I am going to have to actually depart. I'm just noticing the time.
Right, so. No worries. Well, it's coming up towards midnight here, so I think it's a good time to call it.
Well, good night, folks.
Cheers. Thanks for joining in the stream, Elfbait.
I will be back, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Cheers. Thank you. All right, before I go away, I'm just going to have a little chat and look at what you've been going on about in chat. I've got tons of Reaper Bones. I've backed a couple of the Reaper Bones Kickstarters. Painted a few of them. Really need to start painting some more of them, but need to get myself a decent magnifier so I can see properly. Mike, I think if you just listen to the current conversation, Call of Cthulhu there are really 2 ways of approaching it. If you're playing one-shots, and a lot of the adventures are designed to be very much one-shots, then yes, you are likely to go crazy and die because the longevity of the character doesn't matter. But there are a number of campaigns and setting, quite a lot of setting material, which are a lot gentler. And yes, it will go wrong eventually, but it'll take a long time. There's plenty of enjoyment to be got along the way. And part of the enjoyment is coping with playing a character, coping with what is happening. And over time, you will become more invested in the character, and thus your style of play will probably evolve to a more long-term approach, thinking about what you're doing. And yes, if you play a one-shot, you probably will pull out a gun to shoot the whatever alien horror is attacking you. If you're playing a long-term campaign, you'll run away, which is the sensible solution. Pulling out the gun and firing the gun is rarely the right answer because these things are deadly. But I've seen you've just popped this up. Yes. 7th edition is more survivable because it gives you the luck mechanic, and the chance to push rolls, which can be good and bad. But there's more chance to succeed in whatever you're attempting to do. Your characters are still extremely fragile. For the money and service, yeah, I've ordered from Reaper a few times, well, through a British importer. But I say I've got the had a couple of the Kickstarters, and I think the last one was it number 5? More than 100 miniatures for about £100. Worked out about £1 a miniature, and that includes some massive ones. There's a dragon that's about this big in there. It was fantastic value. I need more than reading glasses. These are very vocals. They're not strong enough. Seth Skorkowski's story videos are almost universally fantastic. His ongoing, like the memes his group come up with, and the ongoing threads, superb. Excuse me, I've got a very dry throat. Very much so. I haven't got any of my big models handy. I'll show this one back again. If this was a metal model, it'll probably be 10 quid. That's about the height of 2 normal miniatures. Here's a metal one. That's a normal size metal one. That one, metal one, about 5 quid. That one about £2. It's a bones, plastic. Excuse me. I think my throat is telling me to call an end to this. I'm in need of a drink. Right. I am going to have to call it there because my throat is dying on me. Very, very dry. Thank you all, chat, for joining in. I've gone very, very croaky. So I'm going to call it a day here. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Let's try and push the channel towards 1,000 so I get it all monetized and make 2 pence a week or whatever. But thank you all for supporting. Thank you all for clicking on the like button and whatever gets you all out there, and subscribing and all that sort of stuff. Adam, best wishes to your other half. I hope she gets through all this. But I need a drink, so I'm going to call good night. Cheers, Mike. See you all.